As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
We do not initiate the use of force against others, or submit to force at their hands. If you desire ever again to live in an industrial society, it will be on our moral terms. Our terms and our motive power are the antithesis of yours. You have been using fear as your weapon, and have been bringing death to man as his punishment for rejecting your morality. We offer him life as his reward for accepting ours. You who are worshippers of the zero, you have never discovered that achieving life is not the equivalent of avoiding death. Joy is not the absence of pain. Intelligence is not the absence of stupidity. Light is not the absence of darkness.
Reach! I wanted to teach you. Oh, everything the earth is full of, Helen. Everything on it is ours for a wink and it's gone.
Building is not done by abstaining from demolition. Centuries of sitting and waiting in such abstinence will not raise one single girder for you to abstain from demolishing. And now you can no longer say to me, the builder, produce and feed us in exchange for our not destroying your production. I am answering in the name of all your victims. Perish with and in your own void. Existence is not a negation of negatives. Evil, not value, is an absence and a negation. Evil is impotent and has no power but that which we let it extort from us. Perish, because we have learned that a zero cannot hold a mortgage over life. You seek escape from pain. We seek the achievement of happiness. You exist for the sake of avoiding punishment. We exist for the sake of earning rewards. Threats will not make us function. Fear is not our incentive. It is not death that we wish to avoid, but life that we wish to live. You who have lost the concept of the difference, you who claim that fear and joy are incentives of equal power, and secretly add that fear is the more practical, you do not wish to live, and only fear of death still holds you to the existence you have damned. You dart in panic through the trap of your days, looking for the exit you have closed, running from a pursuer you dare not name to a terror you dare not acknowledge. And the greater your terror, the greater your dread of the only act that could save you. Thinking. The purpose of your struggle is not to know, not to grasp or name or hear the thing I shall now state to your hearing. That yours is the morality of death. Death is the standard of your values. Death is your chosen goal. And you have to keep running, since there is no escape from the pursuer who is out to destroy you, or from the knowledge that that pursuer is yourself. Stop running for once. There is no place to run. Stand naked, as you dread to stand, but as I see you. And take a look at what you dared to call a moral code.
Where am I? What am I? Who am I?
Your name is Adam.
A sin without volition is a slap at morality, and an insolent contradiction in terms. That which is outside the possibility of choice is outside the province of morality. If man is evil by birth, he has no will, no power to change it. If he has no will, he can be neither good nor evil. A robot is amoral. To hold as man's sin a fact not open to his choice is a mockery of morality. To hold man's nature as his sin is a mockery of nature. To punish him for a crime he committed before he was born is a mockery of justice. To hold him guilty in a matter where no innocence exists is a mockery of reason. To destroy morality, nature, justice, and reason by means of a single concept is a feat of evil hardly to be matched, yet that is the root of your code. What is the nature of the guilt that your teachers call his original sin? What are the evils man acquired when he fell from a state they consider perfection? Their myth declares that he ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge. He acquired a mind and became a rational being. It was the knowledge of good and evil. He became a moral being. He was sentenced to earn his bread by his labor. He became a productive being. He was sentenced to experience desire. He acquired the capacity of sexual enjoyment. The evils for which they damn him are reason, morality, creativeness, joy, all the cardinal values of his existence. It is not his vices that their myth of man's fall is designed to explain and condemn. It is not his errors that they hold as his guilt, but the essence of his nature as man.
The serpent reasoned with me. He made me listen.
We had no arguments. I did not give you the burden of understanding, only of obedience.
Something is gone. Something I knew.
That is a pain never to be shed. I made you a world. Now make your own. And will you curse me when it has no purpose, no beauty?
Whatever he was, that robot in the Garden of Eden who existed without mind, without values, without labor, without love, he was not man.
So the Israeli military announced on Sunday that it was withdrawing troops from parts of southern Gaza, and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that this step was being taken to prepare for an assault on Rafah, which is the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip that borders Egypt and is packed with over 1 million Palestinians. So Gallant said, quote, "The withdrawal of the troops from Khan Yunis was carried out after Hamas ceased to function as a military organization in the city. The forces left to prepare for the operation in Rafah," end quote. So Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, who's the head of the Israeli military, he said the withdrawal does not mean the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians would come to an end anytime soon. He said, quote, "The war in Gaza continues and we are far from stopping. Senior Hamas officials are still in hiding. We will get to them sooner or later," end quote. So if you remember earlier, a few months back, you had Israel withdraw troops from northern Gaza, but they continued to bomb the areas there, and then they ended up launching another siege on the Al-Shifa hospital, which is in northern Gaza. So one thing that this could do is move, it could end up that some of the Palestinians sheltering in Rafah could go to Khan Yunis if that's where they're from. Although we have another story that I'll get to later about how Khan Yunis is just completely destroyed, and the Palestinians returning there are just finding rubble, and there's just nothing for them left there, so it doesn't look like it's a place for them to live. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi joined a group of House Democrats in a letter urging President Biden to halt weapons transfers to Israel until there's a full investigation into the Israeli killing of 7 workers for the World Central Kitchen. So Pelosi's signature is notable because she has been a staunch supporter of Israel throughout her long career in Congress. I mean, this is very surprising for me to see. Of course, I don't think she's had a change of heart. I'm sure it's about elections coming up and all that. But one quote that I put in from Pelosi, this is from 2018, just to show how much she loves Israel. She said a few years ago, quote, "If this capital crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment, our aid, our cooperation with Israel," end quote. So if the capital crumbled to the ground, if Washington, D.C. crumbled to the ground, Pelosi says the one thing that would remain is military aid to Israel. So her signature, another angle, it does seem like the Democratic establishment wants to go after Netanyahu, so maybe this could be part of that strategy. We saw Chuck Schumer calling for early elections. But either way, still, I think it's pathetic for other Democrats that haven't, signed on to this letter. The fact that Pelosi did it before them is really shameful. So this letter was signed by a total of 40 House Democrats, and it called for the U.S. to halt arms shipments to Israel until a full investigation into the killing of these workers is completed. So the letter reads, quote, "In light of this incident, we strongly urge you to reconsider your recent decision to authorize the transfer of a new arms package to Israel and to withhold this and any future offensive arms transfers until a full investigation into the airstrike is complete. If this strike is found to have been violated, if this strike is found to have violated U.S. or international law, we urge you to continue withholding these transfers until those responsible are held accountable. We also urge you to withhold these transfers if Israel fails to sufficiently mitigate harm to innocent civilians in Gaza, including aid workers, and if it fails to facilitate the transport and delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza," end quote. So I just mentioned in the article, the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers has gotten all this attention, and, it should have, because it was a horrific crime. But Israel has been doing this throughout these 6 months. Israel has killed over 220 aid workers in Gaza, and that includes 177 employees of the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency. But those are Palestinians, and American politicians don't care when Palestinians are killed. That's just the reality. It's very unfortunate for the Palestinians. But this, they killed a few foreigners, including an American citizen. So I think that's why we're seeing the response that we're seeing. It says Ukraine conducted a large-scale drone swarm attack on a military base inside Russia, but Moscow's air defense appears to have downed the UAVs. As Ukrainian forces continue to lose territory across a vast front line, Kiev has increasingly resorted to attacks on Russian soil. So this was on Friday, and Ukraine launched about 50 drones at an airbase in southern Russia. The Ukrainian side claimed that they hit their mark and damaged or destroyed 14 aircraft, but that Russia denied the losses and said that air defenses repelled and downed most of the drones. And satellite imagery kind of reflects that from before and after the operation. It shows no sign of damage to the aircraft or to the base, suggesting that Russia was able to shoot down most of the incoming drones. But we're seeing more and more, Ukraine continues to launch these attacks inside Russia. And there's been reports that say the drone attacks use intelligence provided by Western countries. So Russia views these as NATO-supported attacks, so they could always lead to a big escalation.
If you want to understand the principles of the revolution, when we talk about the revolution, we're not talking about the war for independence. That was an outgrowth. The revolution was from around 1760, 1761 through 1775, when the shot heard round the world, Lexington and Concord. It was the radical change in the viewpoints of the people, a new understanding, a concept of sovereignty, of final authority, all power flows from the people, and the like. But if you want to understand how the vast majority of people understood things at the time, you gotta read John Dickinson's Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, written in response to the Townshend Acts in 1767, published in late 1767 and throughout 1768. These were the most widely read documents on American liberty throughout the Revolution, up until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense, when the fighting was already going in 1776. And here's an example that he gave that I've cited many times in his 9th letter, talking about how Spain was once free, as he put it. Their Cortes resembled our parliaments. No money could be raised on the subject without their consent. None. One of their kings, though, having received a grant from them to maintain a war against the Moors, desired that if the sum which they had given should not be sufficient, he might be allowed, and Dickinson put some highlights here, all caps and bold and italics. This isn't something that's new in email forwards today. Dickinson used this pretty regularly here, some caps, but here he highlighted that he might be allowed for that emergency only. And that was what he's really emphasizing. The people in Spain were sold on the idea that, well, it's a war, it's an emergency. I know there's a limit on whether or not we can raise money outside the rule, on how we raise the money in order so, well, you don't have one dude making the decision of how all the money's going to go. And that check on power was, well, the king asked, well, in this emergency only, can we raise more money without assembling the Cortes, the parliament? The request, Dickinson writes, was violently opposed by the best and wisest men in the assembly. It was, however, just like we see so many times today, opposition to mass warrantless surveillance, to the Patriot Act, and so many other things are just used for one emergency. And then over time, people learn, well, wait a second, I thought this was just going to be for this. How is it expanded to everything else? We see this in almost everything that government does. Those are just some big examples. And Dickinson points out that it was, however, complied with by the votes of a majority. And this single concession, one time during a war as an emergency to allow them to raise money without following the rules, he said, was a precedent. And he put all caps on precedent for other concessions of the like kind, until at last the crown obtained a general power of raising money in cases of necessity. So it went from the king could only get money with approval of the representatives of the people. Then it went to, well, we just have one emergency. And then from each precedent, you build upon that. That's what government does. And eventually, it wasn't just in emergency situations. The king eventually ended up with a general power to raise money whenever the king decided it was necessary. Very similar to how, well, maybe they've twisted, I'm just thinking of this as I'm talking through it, maybe it's similar to how government treats the necessary and proper clause. Even though there is a very specific legal doctrine, a doctrine of principles and incidents, it has ended up, as many of the anti-federalists warned, that government would determine what government decides what's necessary for government to do. And when you give government that power, you shouldn't be surprised when that government always grows, no matter who's there. So Dickinson warned that this one single concession, even in a time of war, was a precedent. And he said from that period, the Cortes ceased to be useful, and the people ceased to be free. And like he did at the end of this letter, number 9, he had a very important Latin phrase, well-read dude, I can't read it in Latin. He said, oppose a disease at its beginning. This is very similar to what James Otis Jr. had used, John Adams had used, another phrase called obsta principiis, which is nip the shoots of arbitrary power in the bud. This is what the founders and old revolutionaries really thought was incredibly important. Now, Dickinson took the same approach in response to the Stamp Act in 1765. And he was discussing the Stamp Act in 1767 still, because some people are saying, oh, this is just kind of a small thing. I'll get to that in a moment. This is the least offensive thing. Why should we stick our necks out? And he is pointing out that the Stamp Act was a precedent, and we opposed it because of the precedent at the time. And at the time, he published a broadside urging people to refuse to comply with it. Why? And in his words, he said, if you comply with the act, you rivet perpetual chains upon your unhappy country. He pointed out you voluntarily do this too. So by complying with something that they're not authorized to do, even if you think it's a small thing that they're not supposed to do, you are establishing the chains that will bind you for all time. Now, unfortunately, most people don't take this attitude today, but he went a little further. He said, you voluntarily establish the detestable precedent, which those who have forged your fetters ardently wish for, to varnish the future exercise of this new claimed authority. Again, if you comply with the act, you rivet perpetual chains upon your unhappy country. Voluntarily, you just give in and give them the power. Government's going to try to do stuff that they're not authorized to do. If we don't recognize that all governments do this, then we're being pretty dumb. This is a very dangerous approach. If we recognize that what governments do, which is grow and violate liberty and take your money and, well, counterfeit and all kinds of bad stuff, if we allow them to take a single step, why should we be surprised when they take another step? He said, power is of a tenacious nature. What it seizes, it will retain. And he was responding to the point that some people say, well, no huge deal. It's not a huge deal. It's okay because it's a small thing and we'll get it repealed later. And he's pointing out, no. Whatever government takes, they don't give up. And he put it this way. If you quietly bend your necks to that yoke, you prove yourselves ready to receive any bondage to which your lords and masters shall please to subject you.
A lack of solidarity within NATO. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is making several countries in Europe reassess their military defenses. Several members of NATO have said they'll be increasing their numbers of conscripted soldiers, the latest of which were Denmark and Norway. But what are the sentiments of people living in NATO states on the topic? And go to this chart because we love charts because they really graphically demonstrate. The blue, as you see in these charts, is those who believe that they should be defended by NATO, the countries who believe that NATO should and will come to their defense. Now the orange is them believing that they should defend the other members, and that is, in some countries, a huge gap. In the US, for example, 70% said, well, they got to come to our defense, where only 60% say, we got to come to everyone else's defense.
When I was thinking about this, I thought, I wonder how many people there really have been in the past that believe these countries are going to really come and help us out if we really needed them. We're there for a very specific reason. We're developing a market. The market is very important because we deal with it. We're a participant. We have something to say. We'll get control of NATO. And this encourages them because I don't believe, we go to help a lot of people, but it's always the market, what they have. And even if it were a legitimate battle going on and you decide, well, this is just too bad, we're going to join them and we're going to announce, but they don't fight to win, they fight to fight. And we know where all the money goes and how much goes, and yet right now the irony of it all is this has been so ingrained, they don't hesitate for a minute if they think that, we need $10 billion more for next year to help all these countries. And not enough people say, well, where are you going to get the money? Where's the money coming from? Well, they don't want to know. They really know, and they think they can fool people forever that we have a secret. It's called a printing press, and then the other big secret is very few people have learned that the poor and the middle class will bear the burden because they're the ones. You don't see people who are making $200,000 or $300,000 a year or a lot more complaining about the price of bread. And so the people who have to pay are the the middle class and less because the price is going up, and that is a tax, and it goes up because nobody asks where's the money coming from. Well, we don't have it, so we'll print it. Can you get away with that for a while? sometimes a long time if you have military backing up your currency.
Yeah.
And that essentially is true. There is a backing of a currency with the military because nobody wants to mess around. Then you get control of the financial market, and we have these tools of discipline our friends, because if you want us to come and rescue you, you better do what we tell you.
Yeah. Well, the political leaders, especially in Europe, with a couple of exceptions, let's say, they all want to say it's all for one and one for all. Article 5, we're going to all defend each other. But if you put that chart back up, it's clear they don't really think that way. Or certainly the people in those countries don't think that way. Let's look just at Bulgaria, for example. 68% of respondents in Bulgaria believe that they should be protected if something happens to Bulgaria. But only 42% believe that Bulgaria should round up its men, and probably women, who knows, and send them off to fight and die for Ukraine, for example. It's a huge gap between 42 and 68. And it's elsewhere. Iceland, 78% said, well, you better come defend us if we run into some problems. But only 47%, less than half of the people in Iceland surveyed, believe that Iceland has any obligation to defend the other NATO members. That is just an incredible, when you think about that. Look at what Trump actually said, because he's getting a lot of heat for it. But put up that next clip. Here's what Trump posted on his social media. My view is the states will determine by legislation or vote, or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land. In this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people, Trump said. You must follow your heart, or in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for our country. And this looks like a radical position unless you consider what you've always said, which is there are a lot of other crimes that are only state crimes, most of them.
Oh yeah, everything almost. I mean, just think of how many different types of killing it can go when you get into manslaughter, voluntary and involuntary, accidents happening, all these things. And the states haven't gone through. We have to universalize. We know these circumstances, and sometimes there's different penalties. And then, of course, I think it should be states that deal with acts of violence, and when necessary, you use a jury. It too will be imperfect, but I think that is what we were given with the Constitution, and I think the statement is reasonable, what he made.
Yeah, and this is one way the right is like the left. They want to federalize everything, but that doesn't work very well in your favor when you got a place like California, when you've got New York. If you have conservative Texas, and Texas has a rule that's way more conservative, why would you want to bend to the will of some crazies out on the West Coast?
You know what?
The mystic parasites who have throughout the ages reviled the traders and held them in contempt, while honoring the beggars and the looters, have known the secret motive of their sneers. A trader is the entity they dread, a man of justice.
They call this socialistic. I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
They call it a morality of mercy and a doctrine of love for man. The good, say the mystics of spirit, is God, a being whose only definition is that he is beyond man's power to conceive. The good, say the mystics of muscle, is society, a thing which they define as an organism that possesses no physical form, a super being, embodied in no one in particular, and everyone in general, except yourself. Man's mind, say the mystics of spirit, must be subordinated to the will of God. Man's mind, say the mystics of muscle, must be subordinated to the will of society. Selfishness, say both, is man's evil. Man's good, say both, is to give up his personal desires, to deny himself, renounce himself, surrender. Sacrifice, cry both, is the essence of morality, the highest virtue within man's reach. Whoever is now within reach of my voice, whoever is man the victim, not man the killer, I am speaking at the deathbed of your mind, at the brink of that darkness in which you're drowning. And if there still remains within you the power to struggle to hold on to those fading sparks which had been yourself, use it now. The word that has destroyed you is sacrifice. Use the last of your strength to understand its meaning. You're still alive. You have a chance.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice now, sacrifice tomorrow, sacrifice forever.
If that's the kind of sacrifice people are talking about, I'm not for it.
Sacrifice does not mean the rejection of the worthless, but of the precious. Sacrifice is the surrender of that which you value in favor of that which you don't. If you exchange a penny for $1, it is not a sacrifice. If you exchange $1 for a penny, it is. If you achieve the career you wanted after years of struggle, it is not a sacrifice. If you then renounce it for the sake of a rival, it is. If you own a bottle of milk and give it to your starving child, it is not a sacrifice. If you give it to your neighbor's child and let your own die, it is. If you give money to help a friend, it is not a sacrifice. If you give it to a worthless stranger, it is. If you give your friend the sum you can afford, it is not a sacrifice. If you give him money at the cost of disaster to yourself, that is the virtue of sacrifice in full. If you renounce all personal desires and dedicate your life to those you love, you do not achieve full virtue. You still retain a value of your own, which is your love. If you devote your life to random strangers, it is an act of greater virtue. If you devote your life to serving men you hate,
love your enemies.
That is the greatest of the virtues you can practice. If a mother buys food for her hungry child rather than a hat for herself, it is not a sacrifice. She values the child higher than the hat. But it is a sacrifice to the kind of mother whose higher value is the hat, who would prefer her child to starve and feeds him only from a sense of duty. If a man dies fighting for his own freedom, it is not a sacrifice. He is not willing to live as a slave. But it is a sacrifice to the kind of man who's willing. A sacrifice is the surrender of a value. Full sacrifice is full surrender of all values. If you wish to achieve full virtue, you must seek no gratitude in return for your sacrifice, no praise, no love, no admiration, no self-esteem, not even the pride of being virtuous. The faintest trace of any gain dilutes your virtue. If you pursue a course of action that does not taint your life by any joy, that brings you no value in matter, no value in spirit, no gain, no profit, no reward, if you achieve this state of total zero, you have achieved the ideal of moral perfection. You are told that moral perfection is impossible to man, and by this standard it is. You cannot achieve it so long as you live, but the value of your life and of your person is gauged by how closely you succeed in approaching that ideal zero, which is death. If you start, however, as a passionless blank, as a vegetable seeking to be eaten with no values to reject and no wishes to renounce, you will not win the crown of sacrifice. It is not a sacrifice to renounce the unwanted. It is not a sacrifice to give your life for others if death is your personal desire. To achieve the virtue of sacrifice, you must want to live, you must love it, you must burn with passion for this earth, and for all the splendor it can give you. You must feel the twist of every knife as it slashes your desires away from your reach and drains your love out of your body. It is not mere death that the morality of sacrifice holds out to you as an ideal, but death by slow torture. If you wish to save the last of your dignity, do not call your best actions a sacrifice. That term brands you as immoral.
Even Republican stewards, like current Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, are starting to notice that something is shifting in the party. While McConnell announced recently that he would step down as Republican leader in the U.S. Senate, in an interview last week he was adamant that he would continue to serve out his term in the Senate with one purpose in mind: fighting back against the isolationist movement in my own party. He sounds worried. What McConnell deems to be isolationism had for much of our history been called America's traditional foreign policy. There have been major exceptions, but until the emergence of the neoconservatives starting in the late 1970s, we largely adhered to the words of John Quincy Adams that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Why is that? The idea had always been that we would have more influence on freedom worldwide by concentrating on demonstrating the benefits of a free market economy and protection of our constitutional liberties at home. The U.S. would lead the world by example rather than leading at the barrel of a gun. When we strayed from that idea, we got disasters like Vietnam. But then in the 1980s, the neoconservatives seized control of the foreign policy of the Republican Party and eventually much of the Democratic Party. They were determined to remake the world in their image through the use of force. The military-industrial complex and all the special interests loved this takeover because it meant a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to them, the moneyed interest class. The American people at first accepted the hollow promises of the interventionist neocons, believing, as they were told, that it was the patriotic thing to do. What we are now seeing, and is evident in the polls as well as in the speeches of our politicians, is a shift away from interventionism. The mood has changed, and more Americans are tired of being told they must sacrifice to save the rest of the world from itself. Recently, Colonel Douglas McGregor posted on Twitter, "We have lost $14 trillion over the last 20 years on dumb interventions in other countries. What good has it done?" Many Republicans are asking that same question. What have we gotten for the first $100 billion to Ukraine? A victory for freedom like we were promised? No, we got rampaging inflation, decreasing standard of living, and demands for another $100 billion. What did we get for the trillions of dollars we spent in the 20-year war in Afghanistan? Peace and democracy in the region? Hardly. As it's often said, we spent 20 years in Afghanistan replacing the Taliban with the Taliban. All the money wasted, all the lives destroyed, all the blood spilled over the 20 years, and the interventionists achieved nothing. Worse than nothing. Speaker Mike Johnson is facing serious pressure from House Republicans over his desire to keep spending on overseas intervention. That's one reason the National Security Supplemental Foreign Aid Bill has not been brought to the floor. All of a sudden, interventionism is a loser with more of the American people, and politicians are paying attention. McConnell may think that he can stem the tide by preaching more intervention, but not even the Senate Republican leader can stop an idea whose time has come.
So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that there is a date set for Israel's plans to attack the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah, but he didn't say what the date is. He said, quote, "The victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terrorist battalions there. It will happen. There is a date," end quote. So his comments came a day after the Israeli military withdrew troops from areas of southern Gaza, including the city of Khan Yunis, which it left in ruins. I mean, completely destroyed that city. And Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, said that the purpose of the withdrawal was to prepare for the invasion of Rafah. And so in response to what Netanyahu said here, the State Department said that they were not briefed by Israel on any potential date. The U.S. has said that it is opposed to Israel's plans to invade Rafah just because of, the over 1 million Palestinians who are sheltered there, and it would incur these huge civilian casualties. So the U.S. has said that they're against the plan, but it doesn't seem like they're threatening any sort of consequences if they go through with this. And we've seen Netanyahu and other Israeli officials say that they don't care. They keep saying, we're going to do it. Doesn't matter what the U.S. thinks. So Matt Miller, again, the State Department spokesman, said that Israel hasn't informed them, and he reiterated the U.S. opposition to the plan to attack the city. We still see the bombs, throughout the past few months. We've seen the U.S. warning Israel not to attack Rafah. And what has Israel said? They keep saying, well, we're going to do it. And the U.S. keeps giving them bombs. So more than 500,000 people have cast protest votes against President Biden's support for the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza in Democratic primaries across the country. According to The Nation, 530,502 people voted uncommitted or uninstructed where it's available on the ballot. The movement started in Michigan, which, of course, is a big swing state, and there they had over 100,000 people vote uncommitted. And there was a big one in Wisconsin last week, nearly 50,000 votes in Wisconsin, and that far exceeded what the organizers were hoping for. They wanted to secure 20,000 votes, which was the margin of victory for Biden over Trump in 2020. So the fact that they more than doubled that shows that Biden really is in trouble. And we've seen Democrats say that they think this is going to cost Biden in November. And despite, some of these things that we've seen Biden say over the past few days in response to the World Central Kitchen workers being slaughtered, there's no indication that he's really considering a big change in policy when it comes to supporting this horrific genocidal war that's happening in Gaza. So both Hamas officials and Israeli officials said on Monday that no progress was made toward a hostage deal in Egyptian and Qatari-mediated ceasefire negotiations that are taking place in Cairo. Ali Barakam, a senior Hamas official based in Lebanon, said the Palestinian group had rejected the latest proposal from Israel. He said, quote, "We reject the latest Israeli proposals that the Egyptian side informed us of. The Politburo met today and decided this," end quote. Another unnamed Hamas official said that Israel had not changed its position, so that there was nothing new in the Cairo talks. And an Israeli official told Ynet that they still don't see a deal on the horizon and said that the two sides are still far apart. So a Hamas official told CNN that Israel's latest proposal did not address Hamas's key demands, which include a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. That is what Hamas is sticking to. This official said, quote, "The Israeli proposal does not respond to the questions that Hamas has asked in its original proposal, and that is any agreement should clearly include a ceasefire, a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, even if it happens through stages, and the return of the displaced in complete freedom to their homes," end quote. So the CNN report said that CIA Director William Burns had presented a deal to bridge the gaps between the two sides. So there's this U.S. proposal, and the first phase of this would involve the release of 40 Israeli hostages in exchange for about 900 Palestinian prisoners. The U.S. would also like Israel to allow Palestinians who fled from northern Gaza to be able to return to the north, and apparently that's a big sticking point. Israel doesn't want to do that, so the big thing seemed to be the idea of a permanent ceasefire and letting the Palestinians go north. So, they're talking about freeing 40 Israeli hostages here. There was that recent Haaretz report that I covered that I think went pretty under the radar. I don't think many people noticed this, that it says Israeli intelligence believes that only 60 to 70 hostages in Gaza are still alive. So 40 would be most of the remaining hostages. So pressure is mounting on Netanyahu to reach a hostage deal, and Israeli officials have accused him of intentionally sabotaging the talks. Netanyahu has made clear that any ceasefire he agrees to would only be temporary, as he is vowing to launch an invasion of Rafah. Of course, as I mentioned in the last story, he set a date to attack the city, or he said that he did. This is interesting, Yair Lapid, the former Israeli prime minister, who currently leads the main opposition party in the Israeli Knesset, he's in the U.S. this week, speaking with U.S. officials. He met with Antony Blinken on Monday, and he called for a hostage deal to happen. He said, quote, "A hostage deal is doable. It is a difficult deal. That is a deal we may not like, but it's doable and therefore needs to be made," end quote.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
BB, you're a bad boy. I know. Thanks to the bombs. All right? Total fucking bullshit spewing out of the mouth of these warmongering little freaks. That's what all these little pricks are. Little fucking warmongering son of a bitches and bastards that just keep it going. And spewing out the bullshit. Oh, Biden has to. Oh, Netanyahu and Biden are they're nasty words to each other. It's all bullshit. And if you don't believe it's bullshit, how about the bullshit spewing out a fat boy murderous mouth of Lloyd Austin? Yep, just came out before it went on the air. No evidence of genocide in Gaza, Pentagon chief says. Yeah, Pentagon chief, a murderer. Slaughtered people when he ran as general over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not genocide? How about the definition of genocide, Austin? Oh, by Oxford Language. The deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying the nation or group. Yep. Genocide. Oh, don't believe me? How about a little ugly piece of arrogant shit? Hey, take it easy, Salenti. I'm Trump's son-in-law. I'm Jared Kushner. Oh, don't you know my daddy is? Oh, my daddy was the Kushner that gave Trump $1 million for his campaign when he pardoned him for the crimes that he committed. Oh, I'm that Jared Kushner, and I spoke at Harvard. I spoke at Harvard in February, and this is the shit, the genocidal shit that spewed out of my arrogant fucking mouth. Gaza waterfront property could be very valuable. It's a little bit of very valuable waterfront property, and suggested Israel should remove civilians while it, quote, cleans up the strip. Genocide. Oh, this is from The Guardian. Hardly reported in the American media. You know why? Because they're all little fucking scumbag prostitutes. Little pieces of shit that suck up to their corporate pimps and their government whoremasters. 6 companies control over 90% of Americans' media, all owned by the bigs. He goes on, quote, it's a little bit unfortunate situation there. Little bit unfortunate situation. You killed over 33,000 people. You bombed the fucking place into ruin. People are starving to death. Over 80,000 seriously wounded. 40% of those dead children. 30% women. Look at it. Oh, no, it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation. Kushner said Israel should, quote, finish the job by moving the Palestinians to the Negev desert. Yep. But in addition to that, I would just bulldoze something in the Negev. I'd move the people over there. Yep. I think that's the better option, so you can finish the job. That's the quote. Where is the outrage? They're only Palestinians, Salenti. And he goes on, ready? I'm sitting in Miami Beach right now, Kushner said, and I'm looking at the situation and I'm thinking what I would do if I was there. Hey, go over there and do something, fuckface. Go over there and do something. Oh, by the way, Netanyahu's kid who's not fighting over there either, he's in Miami too. Go back to your Trends Journal. Week after week, month after month, for nearly a year and a half, we had forecast that Ukraine is going to ramp up their war against Russia by either attacking deep into Russia and or attacking a nuclear power plant. We got the Israel war, the Ukraine war, and America now ramping up the Middle East war. World War III has begun. There's going to be a false flag event, something major happening. So when I say World War III is going to happen with a false flag event, or a 9/11 2.0, or Ukraine bombing a nuclear power plant or something like that, get ready for it. It's going to happen. Yeah. One article after another, been saying it over and over. Oh, what happened? Oh, they just bombed a nuclear power plant. 5 drone strikes into it. World War III has begun. Why am I angry? Because it's morally justifiable to be angry when people are committing immoral acts. And if you're not angry when you see this immorality, you are immoral, said St. Thomas Aquinas. World War III has begun. And if we don't stop it, it's going to be a wipeout. Hey, did you see the solar eclipse yesterday? That was all the fucking news. Did Taylor Swift get fucked up in a second? Yeah, I mean, that's the news.
You have written, starting with Ukraine now, that events in Ukraine have mobilized or solidified Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of Europe against the United States and the West. Can you explain what you mean by that, please, Colonel?
Well, you have to look at a number of things, but most important, we have appealed to the world to back this proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, and it hasn't worked. When you look at most of the so-called developing world, it's almost universally behind Russia. And naturally, it has helped enormously for China and India, and which represent, let's put it bluntly, almost half or more of the population of the planet, to sign on for Russia. So then you add to this the BRICS issue. And even though BRICS only has at this point 8 or 9 members, the truth is there are 84 nations preparing to join it. And of course, is the financial effort to move to gold-pegged currency. In other words, to get out from under our financial hegemony. So you have, on the one hand, large numbers of people who are tired of being targets for U.S. military intervention and CIA meddling on the one hand, and on the other, you have people that said we don't want to be under the financial thumb of the United States and New York City any longer.
It's interesting about gold. Of course, the United States was on the gold standard until FDR partially took us off, and then Nixon completed the removal. And now you have these developing nations with a better understanding. I don't want to get into Economics 101, but I have to comment on this. I have a better understanding of Economics 101 and the value to stability of gold than the United States and the West has. You probably agree with me on that.
Oh, yeah, obviously. And I don't know how much gold we actually have. You'll recall that our friend, Dr. Ron Paul, has tried repeatedly, at least while he was in office, to audit the whole system and inspect the gold holdings.
Right.
He was never allowed to do so, which leads me to question just how much is really there. And that's not a good thing either. The Germans wanted to repatriate all of their gold, and I think they got something in the neighborhood of 60% back, but the rest continues to sit somewhere inside the United States, presumably under the streets of New York City. But who knows? And I think this is part of our problem. And you're right. You know, Nixon said at the time, as you know, that this was a temporary measure, like so many other things in Washington, because we faced at that point financial ruin and crisis because LBJ had bankrupted us in Vietnam and with his war on poverty. And if you go back and look at those circumstances and look at where we are today, no one can take us off anything to rescue us at this point.
Remember Milton Friedman's famous one-liner, nothing in the world is more permanent than a temporary government program.
Exactly.
Does Russia have the upper hand in Europe today from and after Ukraine? That is it stronger than is its military stronger than the combined militaries of Europe?
Yes. Keep in mind that the combined militaries of Europe don't amount to much. We want to add up the amounts of money invested in defense, and we want to look at the numbers of people in 32 countries that might serve in the military, but it's entirely meaningless. Russia has an enormous advantage. It's homogenous. It's raised at a sizable force, now well over 800,000 and climbing. It speaks one language of command. It has one unified military command structure. It has absolute unity of effort. None of that exists in NATO. everyone is sort of a Band-Aid over its gaping wound of incompetence, inefficiency, and ill-equipped character. In other words, everyone plugs in or tries to plug into the United States and its force. Our force is now minuscule. We couldn't send anything to Europe to make any difference right now, and anything short of 6 months to a year if we were lucky. So we're in no position to confront the Russians anywhere in in Ukraine, period. And that's going to become very, very obvious in the months ahead when the Russian offensive sweeps out of its way whatever is in front of it. And we're going to watch, frankly, as we in Washington, our government, our people, our NATO alliance is humiliated and is revealed as impotent and irrelevant.
You've been saying that for a while. You just said it a few minutes ago. The Russian military is stronger in many different measurements today than it was before the special military operation began, notwithstanding its initial foray of losses. Is there any question in your mind, Colonel McGregor, which side would win a land war today, Russia or NATO?
Absolutely none. The Russians would win hands down. There's no question about it. The good news is the Russians aren't interested in it. They don't want it. They never have. And what we interpreted as losses were not really significant at all at the beginning of the operation. It's simply that President Putin and the assumptions that he ordained for the military were inaccurate. He thought that he was going to go in with a small force, signal the seriousness with which Moscow takes our activities in Ukraine at the time, and that we would then say, oh, we need to stop this. This is a destructive war. Let's negotiate. And of course, he discovered quite the opposite. We were not only going to not negotiate, we were going to do everything in our power to destroy his country. We are now on the road to humiliation. That's the bottom line. We can't stop anything. And the $60 billion that Kurt Campbell mentioned is like taking a garden hose to a 5-alarm fire. Who are we kidding? It's a drop in the bucket. How much of it will ever get to Ukraine? Very little. How much of it will disappear into the corruption? Most of it. What doesn't go to Ukraine, which is more than half of it, will just circulate in Washington, make donors and constituents happy, and enrich the usual suspects in the defense industry and inside the Beltway. So it's just absurd.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
The clip.
Yes, we know that.
It is. It is.
What do you say to voters who are upset that those are the two choices?
Get over yourself. Those are the two choices.
Yeah, love that.
Right? And it's kind of like one is old and defective and compassionate, has a heart, and really cares about people. And one is old and has been charged with 91 felonies.
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
okay, interesting.
I don't understand why this is even a hard choice, really. I don't understand it. But we have to go through the election, and hopefully people will realize what's at stake, because it's an existential question.
Hey, what's your message to people who aren't happy with either candidate? And she goes, my message is get over yourself. Is that helpful for the Joe Biden re-election effort?
I don't think she's
get over yourself.
It doesn't seem like she's using that expression correctly. Get over yourself is usually when you're not entitled to something. In this case, so she's saying, yeah, both the candidates suck, but get over yourself. We're not supposed to have good candidates.
Well, just imagine for almost everybody I know who is not ideologically possessed, which is the majority of people I know, would readily concede that it's insane that out of a country of 320 plus million people, running Trump versus Biden again is what we're left with. Like almost everybody would go, that by definition means that the system is broken to some level, to some degree. Because, like, come on, there's just so many people who are better than these guys. I know people who are better. Almost everyone I know is better than these two guys. And so for the question to be like, well, what about people who go, hey, we don't think that, like, and these are people who are like, hey, we don't really like Donald Trump. It's not as if someone was asking Hillary Clinton, what do you think about these hardcore Trump supporters? What's being asked of her is, what do you think about these guys who are like, yeah, we don't like Trump, but like, we got to run this fucking senile clown who sniffs children, has a horrible track record on everything. We got to run him. And she goes, my message is get over yourself. One's an old guy who loves everyone, and the other one's an old guy who's been strung up on all these charges. Ugh.
I think that there's been a reaction on the right to the excesses of the left. So because what the left did is they said that the Overton window ought to be closed so tight that no one can get inside the Overton window. Basically, if you're to the right of Hillary Clinton, you can't be allowed inside the Overton window.
World,
yes, exactly. and not just with regard to platforms, but with regard to publishers. So, for example, this week, NBC News deciding that Ronna McDaniel was too much for them. Ronna McDaniel can't work at NBC News. The sacred halls of NBC News must not be sullied by the former head of the RNC. Jen Psaki, however, can have a show on MSNBC despite being the press secretary for the White House 5 seconds ago. Right? The right's response to that is, I think, correct to say you guys have shut the Overton window too tight. But I think some elements of the right have basically said there is no Overton window. The Overton window should be completely exploded with regard not just to platforms, with which I kind of agree, but with regard to publishers. So NBC News not only has an obligation to hire Ronna McDaniel, NBC News has the obligation to hire Alex Jones, for example.
Right, which just makes no sense at a business level beyond free speech. I mean, there's a reason that networks exist.
Right, they have editorial positions.
Yeah.
Daily Wire has a very strong editorial position on a wide variety of issues. And by the way, I should say that there are a lot of people who are suggesting this is about disagreements over Israel. I mean, I can safely say it's not about disagreements over Israel to the extent that, without reference to Candace at all here, Matt Walsh has taken the position that America ought not be involved in the Middle East at all.
Okay, I am a libertarian. I believe you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do with your business. But I also think other people should be allowed to accurately assess what you're doing with your business. So all I'm saying is that, all right, fine. But your Overton window is that you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Fine. But let's be honest about what your organization is then. And I know he got very offended at the tweet. I said, I don't know what Pat said about him, but he got very offended in that tweet we read earlier about Patrick Bet-David said we should rename ourselves the Daily Jewish Wire or whatever. But okay, but you're saying your Overton window is criticizing Israel. That's what you're not allowed to do. So, all right, fine. But then then okay, but then they're also allowed to describe you in the way that you're defining yourself. All right, fine. It's outside the Overton window to criticize Israel. All right, that's your Overton window. But it's well within my Overton window to point out that you are someone who made your career off opposing identity politics and opposing cancel culture. And you're involved in both. You're involved in both of those things. What really matters to you at the end of the day is your identity and the politics that follow from that. And what really matters to you is canceling anyone outside your Overton window. I think that's reasonable.
I think it's what we said on the last one. You're showcasing you're not interested in exploring truth. Unless you can kind of come forward and tell me exactly what she said that was outside of what you feel you're comfortable platforming. It seems like she was asking questions about what the nature of this conflict is and was exploring truth. And you're not interested in platforming that. You don't want to explore truth because part of what you guys do is pro-Israel propaganda and probably pro-war propaganda, just generally speaking. Yeah. I mean, I don't watch the shows regularly, but I've certainly seen, I think him supporting Ukraine war, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So that's, that's what you're doing. So, and by the way, that's because you don't want truth. Sometimes you got to overwhelm people with the same perspective, because if you got another show host who's asking questions that make sense, same as during COVID, wait, why, how come I'm not allowed to sit on a plane? How come when I sit down in a restaurant, my mask comes off? Right. How come I can't be outside? Sometimes just a couple common sense questions and people start going, oh yeah, this doesn't really make sense. And so you can't have common sense in front of people because they might wake up a little bit. And so you know what you do? You censor them by removing them and making sure that no one can hear that information. And you just openly said that that's what you're doing, that you're treating questions about Israel the same as, things that we would understand censoring on a platform, like an overtly racist statement, a call for aggression towards other groups of people. Like there are things that you go, all right, I understand why you're not going to pay for this. But when people are just asking questions and searching for truth and you go, well, we can't have that here. It's censorship.
Yeah.
Israeli weapons makers are selling some weapons platforms that have been utilized during the onslaught in Gaza. Now that sounds obscene, but this is the arms business, so identity is part of it. Tel Aviv's arms industry has found buyers among several Asian countries as Washington tries to make allies in the region, preparing for a future war with China. This is the interesting part, I think, Dr. Paul, because there are a lot of people that claim that as an ally, Israel doesn't really bring anything to the table for the U.S. I think this is an example where they actually do, but it's not for the U.S. people, it's for the U.S. arms industry. They're going around the world selling arms to countries that want to have a war with China. So they're kind of doing our bidding in stirring up war, not peace overseas.
Well, some of the other countries like Afghanistan, they do sell weapons. We know about how these countries that we put the weapons in there. But I would think this is more evidence just from a practical viewpoint. Why are we still sending weapons over there if they can make their own? Get them from somebody else. But of course, the non-intervention position is you don't give them money, intelligence, or anything else. You treat them as friends. And you treat them equally with everybody.
Exactly.
But not to subsidize them. So that's what I think. I hope that is the prevailing issue that's developing, on all these issues of on war funding, especially with Ukraine and the money that could be spent elsewhere, because that is the important thing. Is if they see this as a false, it's an illusion that all of a sudden this is necessary for our national security.
Yeah.
See, I think when you get in a crowd and start talking about this, people, even if they're not with us on, libertarianism, they might say, well, that does make sense. Well, how does it really help us? But boy, some of them just, love it for the sake of loving that type of activities. There's a bunch of those people too.
Yeah, that's true. Well, here's what they did. If you put on that next clip, they went to an arms show in Singapore to demonstrate their weapons. To the people who are enemies of China. And the U.S. has long been trying to court the Philippines and a couple of other countries down there who've wavered back and forth. We need to have like a base over there that we can provoke China with. So back to the article by Kyle. In coverage of the Singapore arms event, Haaretz notes that some of the drones touted by the Israeli arms dealers were used by Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh last year. Last year, the Azeris completed an ethnic cleansing of the region by forcing the enclave's last 100,000 residents out of the Republic of Artsakh and into Armenia. An Israeli official said it was primarily seeking clients who did not buy Chinese arms. Quote, ultimately, all the countries in the region are threatened by the Chinese. A senior figure in one of the Israeli defense companies told Haaretz, here at this air show, they don't buy fighter jets from China. So they've already been tested by Azerbaijan, which completed an ethnic cleansing of ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And so they're pretty good for ethnic cleansing, so that's what they're taking to the market, I guess.
So many people, especially right now, they have this bizarre position that we have to deal with China, they're taking away our business, and we have to slap them down and this sort of thing. If we just back off, and they'll self-destruct like we're doing to ourselves. So they would take care of the problems that we think we have to be there. But unfortunately, there's a money issue involved too, which is a driving force for so much of what they do.
Yeah. And this is what Politico has to say about it. Inside the House's GOP surveillance law nightmare, if we can put that up. This is Speaker Johnson again being brutally battered and beaten about the head and body with a raucous Republican group in the House. But we've talked about it before. Section 702 of the FISA Reform Act, which was passed in that era where we passed the Patriot Act that let them spy on us, but they promised it would just sunset. Then they passed the FISA reform stuff, and they said, don't worry, it'll sunset. It's only for the bad guys. And then Snowden came around, and others, and saying, well, actually, no, they're spying on you, and that's what it's all about. So we passed some more reform stuff. So reform, but at the end of the day, what it means is they don't want to let go of the ability to spy on us. And what it is, and this is a paragraph that explains it pretty well, hopefully in a way that's understandable, if you can put this one up. Reapproving the section of the FISA, Foreign Intelligence Service Surveillance Act, known as Section 702, it allows the intelligence community to collect and search through communications of foreign targets without a warrant. And this is the article says it was always going to be difficult given the sour relationship between some Republicans and the FBI. But that skepticism, which dates back to the FBI's initial investigation into Trump's campaign in 2016, is only the start of the party's problems on surveillance policy, according to interviews. So essentially what it is, Dr. Paul, to reiterate, and you know this well, is they can suck up everything as long as it's a foreign target. But say you got a call from Iran. Hey, Dr. Paul, you want to come on our show? Then they would suck up not only that call, but everything that you have in your information. And if you called me and said, hey, what are we going to do for the show tomorrow? Then they would suck me into it. So they suck all this stuff without a warrant. And a lot of people are opposed to doing that. They want to retain that ability to do that.
And who follows up on all this, the details? This is the CIA.
Yeah.
And, this nonsense that started with the Patriot Act and fell through with FISA, it exists. There's always been a little bit, but it's much worse. And my contention is that the Republic has been destroyed in this country. And who takes over when there's a vacuum? And I think it's the CIA and other agencies like
NSA,
that.
yeah.
And you can't touch them. But there was always this idea that they were sacred and it was a patriotic thing to do, except I think it's starting to shift a little bit, just like these interventionist wars. The attitude is shifting too. So I would say there are some good signs out there, but we should have a long way to go to get people to accept the idea that you don't need those type of agencies spying on our enemies when they usually are spying on us.
They call it a morality of mercy and a doctrine of love for man. No, they say they do not preach that man is evil. The evil is only that alien object, his body. No, they say they do not wish to kill him. They only wish to make him lose his body. They seek to help him, they say, against his pain. And they point at the torture rack to which they've tied him, the rack with two wheels that pull him in opposite directions, the rack of the doctrine that splits his soul and body. They have cut man in two, setting one half against the other. They have taught him that his body and his consciousness are two enemies, engaged in deadly conflict, two antagonists of opposite natures, contradictory claims, incompatible needs, that to benefit one is to injure the other, that his soul belongs to a supernatural realm, but his body is an evil prison, holding it in bondage to this earth, and that the good is to defeat his body, to undermine it by years of patient struggle, digging his way to that glorious jailbreak which leads into the freedom of the grave. As products of the split between man's soul and body, there are two kinds of teachers of the morality of death, the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle, whom you call the spiritualists and the materialists, those who believe in consciousness without existence, and those who believe in existence without consciousness. They have taught man that he is a hopeless misfit, made of two elements, both symbols of death. A body without a soul is a corpse. A soul without a body is a ghost. Yet such is their image of man's nature, the battleground of a struggle between a corpse and a ghost. Do you observe what human faculty that doctrine was designed to ignore? It was man's mind that had to be negated in order to make him fall apart. Once he surrendered reason, he was left at the mercy of two monsters whom he could not fathom or control, of a body moved by unaccountable instincts, and of a soul moved by mystic revelations. The purpose of man's life, say both, is to become an abject zombie who serves a purpose he does not know for reasons he is not to question.
I like turtles. All right, you're great, zombie.
His reward, say the mystics of spirit, will be given to him beyond the grave. His reward, say the mystics of muscle, will be given on earth to his great-grandchildren. You are an indivisible entity of matter and consciousness. Renounce your consciousness, and you become a brute. Renounce your body, and you become a fake. Renounce the material world, and you surrender it to evil. And that is precisely the goal of your morality, the duty that your code demands of you. Give to that which you do not enjoy, serve that which you do not admire, submit to that which you consider evil, surrender the world to the values of others, deny, reject, renounce yourself. Yourself is your mind. Renounce it, and you become a chunk of meat ready for any cannibal to swallow. It is your mind that they want you to surrender. All those who preach the creed of sacrifice, whatever their tags or their motives, whether they demand it for the sake of your soul or of your body, whether they promise you another life in heaven or a full stomach on this earth. You are asked to sacrifice your intellectual integrity, your logic, your reason, your standard of truth, in favor of becoming a prostitute whose standard is the greatest good for the greatest number. Since life requires a specific course of action, any other course will destroy it. A being who does not hold his own life as the motive and goal of his actions is acting on the motive and standard of death.
Die höchste Selbstlosigkeit dieser Nation voranleben, will auch diese Jugend selbstlos sein, weil sie die Treue für uns verkörpern. Darum wollen auch wir treu sein.
If you search your code for guidance, for an answer to the question, what is the good? The only answer you will find is the good of others. The good is whatever others wish, whatever you feel they wish, or whatever you feel they ought to feel. The good of others is a magic formula that transforms anything into gold, a formula to be recited as a guarantee of moral glory and as a fumigator for any action, even the slaughter of a continent. Your standard of virtue is not an object, not an act, not a principle, but an intention. You need no proof, no reasons, no success. You need not achieve, in fact, the good of others. All you need to know is that your motive was the good of others, not your own. Your only definition of the good is a negation. The good is the non-good for me. Your code, which boasts that it upholds eternal, absolute, objective moral values and scorns the conditional, the relative, and the subjective, your code hands out, as its version of the absolute, the following rule of moral conduct. If you wish it, it's evil. If others wish it, it's good. If the motive of your action is your welfare, don't do it. If the motive is the welfare of others, then anything goes. As this double-jointed, double-standard morality splits you in half, so it splits mankind into two enemy camps. One is you. The other is all the rest of humanity. You are the only outcast who has no right to wish or live. You are the only servant. The rest are the masters. You are the only giver. The rest are the takers. You are the eternal debtor. The rest are the creditors, never to be paid off. You must not question their right to your sacrifice, or the nature of their wishes and their needs. Their right is conferred upon them by a negative, by the fact that they are non-you. For those of you who might ask questions, your code provides a consolation prize and booby trap. It is for your own happiness, it says, that you must serve the happiness of others. The only way to achieve your joy is to give it up to others. The only way to achieve your prosperity is to surrender your wealth to others. The only way to protect your life is to protect all men except yourself. And if you find no joy in this procedure, it is your own fault and the proof of your evil. If you were good, you would find your happiness in providing a banquet for others, and your dignity in existing on such crumbs as they might care to toss you. You who have no standard of self-esteem except the guilt, and dare not ask the questions. But you know the unadmitted answer, refusing to acknowledge what you see, what hidden premise moves your world. You know it. Not an honest statement, but as a dark uneasiness within you, while you flounder between guilty cheating and grudgingly practicing a principle too vicious to name. I who do not accept the unearned, neither in values nor in guilt, am here to ask the question you evaded. Why is it moral to serve the happiness of others but not your own? If enjoyment is of value, why is it moral when experienced by others but immoral when experienced by you? If the sensation of eating a cake is of value, why is it an immoral indulgence in your stomach but a moral goal for you to achieve in the stomach of others? Why is it immoral for you to desire but moral for others to do so? Why is it immoral to produce a value and keep it, but moral to give it away? And if it is not moral for you to keep a value, why is it moral for others to accept it? If you are selfless and virtuous when you give it, are they not selfish and vicious when they take it? Does virtue consist of serving vice? Is the moral purpose of those who are good self-immolation for the sake of those who are evil? The answer you evade, the monstrous answer, is no. The takers are not evil, provided they did not earn the value you gave them. It is not immoral for them to accept it, provided they are unable to produce it, unable to deserve it, unable to give you any value in return.
Current rules make qualifying for help almost impossible if you own a car or have a small amount of savings.
It is not immoral for them to enjoy it, provided they do not obtain it by right. Such is the secret core of your creed, the other half of your double standard. It is immoral to live by your own effort, but moral to live by the effort of others. It is immoral to consume your own product, but moral to consume the products of others. It is immoral to earn, but moral to mooch.
President Biden said in an interview with Univision that aired on Tuesday that Israel should call a 6 to 8 week ceasefire and appeared not to condition a truce on a hostage deal with Hamas. So Biden said in this interview, and this was recorded last Wednesday, so keep that in mind, but he said, quote, "So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country. I've spoken with everyone from the Saudis to the Jordanians to the Egyptians. They're prepared to move in. They're prepared to move this food in. And I think there's no excuse to not provide for the medical and the food needs of those people. It should be done now," end quote. So this seems like a shift. Biden basically calling for a ceasefire without calling for a hostage deal to be attached, temporary ceasefire. But it's unclear if this really means a shift in policy. On the same day, before the interview aired, you had President Biden's top officials pinning the blame for the lack of a ceasefire on Hamas. This was both Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan were saying this on Tuesday. Blinken's quote was, quote, "Hamas has an opportunity now to agree to the proposal on a ceasefire and hostages. The ball is in Hamas's court. The world is watching to see what it does," end quote. So putting it all on Hamas and not Israel. And as I covered yesterday, Hamas rejected Israel's latest proposal. They said that it did not address their main demands, which include they want a permanent ceasefire and they want the free movement of displaced Palestinians so they could go back to the north. So the State Department announced on Tuesday an emergency foreign military sale to Ukraine for $138 million worth of equipment to maintain and upgrade its Hawk air defense systems. The deal is being paid for by U.S. military aid for Ukraine that was included in the U.S.'s annual military spending bill that President Biden signed into law last month. So this is aid that was included for the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act. This is separate from the other aid that has been sent to Ukraine. This is annual aid. And this bill included $300 million for Ukraine in the form of foreign military financing, which is a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to buy U.S. weapons. And I was actually thinking to myself recently when they were going to start using that, and they didn't wait very long here. And they're saying that this is an emergency sale, so that means they're going to expedite it, but it still could take a while for these air defense systems to get there. And this comes as Russia has been stepping up missile and drone strikes against infrastructure across Ukraine. Russia's strikes have been much more effective as Moscow has better intelligence at this point, and they're finding gaps in Ukraine's air defense systems. They're adapting to Ukraine's Western air defense systems that they've gotten as well. From Kyle Anzalone, U.S. Central Command reported that it sent thousands of small arms and rocket launchers to Ukraine that it seized in the Middle East. They're claiming that these weapons were bound for the Houthis in Yemen. And they've done this before. They did this a few months ago. And I think it just really shows that the hypocrisy of the U.S. to seize weapons. I mean, these are small arms and say, no, they can't go there, but they can go here. This is the war that we want to fuel. So the move comes as the White House is still seeking to get more money for Ukraine, Kyle mentions. And U.S. Central Command announced the transfer. They said that the U.S. government transferred over 5,000 AK-47s, machine guns, sniper rifles, RPGs, and over 500,000 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition to the Ukrainian armed forces. They said that this constitutes enough material to equip one Ukrainian brigade with small arms rifles, or maybe one neo-Nazi militia. These weapons will help Ukraine, they're saying, will help Ukraine defend against Russia's invasion. This article is from the Washington Post, and really the story here is that the Washington Post is running this story, and it basically says Zelensky is in a really bad position because he's got nowhere to go, no chance at victory on the battlefield, but negotiating a deal with Russia is not politically, if he gives away territory, not gives it away, I mean, it's not his to give away at this point, but if he concedes territory at any part of the deal, then politically he's done. So it's just interesting to see this in the Washington Post. I'll read a little bit of it. It says, as Russia steps up airstrikes and once again advances on the battlefield in Ukraine more than 2 years into its bloody invasion, there is no end to the fighting in sight, and President Volodymyr Zelensky's options for what to do next, much less how to win the war, range from bad to worse. Zelensky has said Ukraine will accept nothing less than the return of all of its territory, including Crimea, but with the battle lines changing little in the last year, militarily retaking swaths of East and South Ukraine that Russia now occupies, which is about 20% of the country, appears increasingly unlikely. And they're saying that negotiating with Putin is politically toxic inside Ukraine. The Ukrainian public is opposed to surrendering territory, and Putin has shown no willingness to, they say, accept anything short of Ukraine's capitulation to his demands. But his demands are, it's not clear exactly if they got into negotiations, but the main Russian demand has been neutrality. That's what it was before they annexed the territory that they captured. But as the war dragged on, then they annexed the territory. So Russia's demands, if there's talks, would be Ukrainian neutrality and that these territories would become Russia. I would be surprised if they offered any sort of, of that territory back. And it says the status quo is awful with the fight now a grinding stalemate. Ukrainians are dying on the battlefield daily, but a ceasefire is also a non-starter because it would just give the Russians time to replenish their forces. That's kind of a nonsensical talking point. I think you see that from people when it comes to Gaza. Is a ceasefire just gives the other side time to replenish forces, but doesn't that give your side time to replenish forces too? Doesn't really make sense. But it's interesting. This says Ukrainian and Western officials view Zelensky as largely stuck, and they quote Western officials who say that and Ukrainian officials as well.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
And Judge has articles coming out tomorrow. He has them every Thursday. And one of them is going to be the CIA wants more power to spy on Americans. I mean, Judge, I'm reading this thing and I'm so angry. I'm angry. Americans need to be aware of the unbridled propensity of federal intelligence agencies to spy on all of us without search warrants as required by the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. These agencies believe that the Fourth Amendment, which protects the individual rights of privacy, only regulates law enforcement and does not apply to domestic spying. And these agencies believe you right. How about what Mickey Mouse believes? How about what some arrogant little clown believes? Hey, what I believe. Screw you and screw the Constitution. It's what I believe.
That's almost literally what they say. It's certainly what they mean, and it's certainly the way they behave. When I say they, I'm talking about the Congress. I mean, the reason I raise this is because Section 702 of the FISA Act, which allows the feds to spy on foreign persons in the United States without search warrants and on the Americans with whom they speak, is up for renewal next Friday. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who once opposed all this, has given every indication he's going to let it come to the floor and he's going to support its renewal with an expansion of federal authority. So right now, if I call a cousin in Florence, Italy, the feds can monitor that conversation without suspicion, without probable cause, and without a search warrant, just because my cousin is a foreign person talking to me, an American. And then they can monitor my conversations because I'm an American. What they want are called 2 more hops, which would allow them to spy on everyone I talk to you, like now I'm talking to you, and then another hop, everybody that you talk to. This is just crazy, and Congress is about to vote on this with no great national debate, just a voice vote with a half dozen libertarians and left-wing progressives opposing this, but the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans, and one Republican who could stop it, Mike Johnson, the Speaker, now in favor of it. I suspect, and I say at the end of the column, that the intelligence community has dirt on so many members of Congress that's the reason they keep voting to reconstitute these authorities and to increase the secret budgets, even though the Constitution says no money shall be spent but what is recorded in a public journal. Try and find out how the CIA or NSA or FBI are spending your tax dollars. You won't be able to. The country is not a republic any longer. It's an empire, and empires don't last. And empires continue to grab more and more power from individuals and from the subdivisions, the states, which constitute the empires. We are falling into that classic trap that has undone empires before us.
And before you said about how, what is it, we've gone from a republic to a fall of an empire. Is that what you?
Yes. We have more than 1,000 military installations overseas. Listen, if Tuberville had asked Austin about them, he couldn't answer what they were. Tuberville also said, is it true that we have 12 CIA stations in Ukraine? And the Secretary of Defense said, ask the director of the CIA. I mean, we are so overextended that our debt grows by $1 trillion a month.
You see where Brent crude is now. You go back a couple of months ago, it was selling for $73 a barrel. Now it's over $90 a barrel.
Ooh, boy.
If not when, I should say when, Iran responds to Israel's latest murder of the Iranian commanders in the consulate in Syria, Netanyahu said they're going to respond back. That could drive oil prices up to above $130 a barrel. That in turn is going to crash the global economy and the equity markets. As we're speaking, the equity market's down. The Dow is down about almost 500 points because the inflation number came in, you ready? 0.1% higher than they estimated. 0.1%. So inflation's not going away. And it's much higher than the numbers that they're giving because they rigged those numbers. If, for example, housing prices went up. No, we're not putting housing prices in there. We have apartment rentals. We're changing the whole thing. People stop eating steak. They're eating chopped meat now. The diet changed. So they rigged the numbers. The numbers are much higher. But even with the numbers that are coming out now, the economy can't handle it. If oil prices, not if, when, oil prices skyrocket, this is going to crash the economy. And you had mentioned what Netanyahu is doing. He wants to keep ramping up the war so they don't have elections. You're going to see the same thing in the United States. The people are ready. We're going to go to war. There is no one. Oh, you hear Trump, Biden said about Netanyahu. He said, it's a mistake what you're doing in Gaza. A mistake? A mistake? Oh, and people don't like my language. You have to speak that kind of stupid language. You can't say, you little bastard, what the F are you doing over there? No, it's a mistake.
Yesterday, the Iranians announced to the United States, we have decided not to close the Straits of Hormuz. That's a very powerful statement reminding the Western world that they can close it. And if they do, no trade goes in or out.
Judge, we need peace on earth.
Live from Run Your Mouth World Headquarters. It's today's Run Your Mouth.
Biden promotes life-changing student loan relief in Wisconsin as he rallies younger voters. And rallies that's a bold word for Biden. I mean, whispers might be a little bit better. Begs you to overlook the other problems. Don't look at the wars. Don't look at the Israel thing or the immigration thing that gets in the way of you having jobs. Don't look at that. Or the price is going up. Don't look at that either. I don't want, but here's some free stuff. All right. Biden said he wanted to give everybody a fair shot and the freedom to chase their dreams. And, what about the kids that didn't go to school? When you went to school, wasn't that you chasing your dreams? And then you failed at your dreams of becoming a DEI officer, right? You went to school with the dream of becoming the person who could be hired by a corporation to make sure that, like, you as a white person wanted to go and get a job at Walmart to make sure that they were being nice to the minorities. And then you found out that they didn't really need a white person to go do that job. or you really studied gender studies, and then all of a sudden, your whole thing about how women aren't being treated as fairly as men, and it got totally distorted when men started becoming women. And then you're like, there aren't even genders. Why am I studying these genders? And then you found out that even if you had a total understanding of it and the gender science studies weren't changing on you all the time, you still wouldn't have gotten a job with it anyways. So didn't these kids already live their dream? They lived their dream. They pursued their dream when they went to school, and they were lied to about, that was the dream, was going to school, partying, learning something really stupid, and then thinking you were going to win the lottery and get a job with your really stupid skill set. That was your chance at your dream. And some people are living that dream. Some people have figured out how to make lucrative careers out of what they were taught in school. And then other people, they went and they didn't get those DEI officer jobs, or they were fired from those DEI officer jobs, or they realized that the world doesn't need fairness police. All right, let's read the next quote. This is, I don't know where this was from. Since then, the White House has pursued debt relief through other targeted initiatives, including those for public service workers and low-income borrowers. Administration officials said they have canceled $144 billion in student loans for almost 4 million Americans. This is where it gets confusing, where at first they tried to get rid of a whole lot of this stuff, and then that got overruled by the Supreme Court. And then they got rid of, it's like, you know what it is? I guess everyone's keeping quiet about whether or not they got a check so that we don't hate them. There's people out there, right? And their student loans off the hook. And they're not going out there and going, thank you, Biden, because then we'll be like, you motherfucker, you got free money? They took care of your fucking debt. And then you start looking on the person's Instagram page and you're like, look at all the vacations that this person took. I want to know, can we get a public record of where all this money goes to so that we can shame these individuals? Let's find out. Let's find out what the lifestyle of those parents were. Let's find out how many coffees they're drinking in a day. Let's find out what kind of bars they go to on the weekend. Let's find out what their drug habits are. Let's find out the homes that they live in, the vacations they're taking, and the pictures that they're posting on Instagram. I want to know where that $144 billion went. Listen, if some of it went to, these people living in rural communities, got their 4 kids, and, at some point there's some people, they're like, listen, I don't like these government programs, but at least the fact that the money made it to you, it seems like you really need it. All right, listen, I'd prefer if we didn't have the program, and I know that most of the time the programs get in the way, but in this particular case, it seemed like it worked out. But what percentage of this do you just think went to some affluent, whiny cunts? All right. And then this is, I got to start marking where I was getting these things from. I apologize today. I didn't mark the articles. Concerns about the war have spread throughout the Madison's area, said Democratic Met Mark Pokin. And it's basically Biden going, I know you don't like, they were bombing kids in Gaza, but have some money. Free stuff, right? Everyone, you guys like the free stuff. Some young voters have been impatient with Biden's attempt to wipe away student loan debt. The Supreme Court last year foiled his first attempt to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars in loans, a decision that Biden called a mistake. And that also sucks, thinking that your student loan was debt and then finding out that you still have to pay it. Or if you were in the first category of people who were told that your student loan debt was being forgiven, and then they got the new plan and it's not being forgiven. And then also, how is it that the government is allowed to, they're allowed to do something that's illegal. It finally gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court goes, hey, you're not allowed to do that. That's illegal. And then instead of trying to do things that aren't illegal, they take time, money, and resources to figure out how to work around what the Supreme Court said was illegal. That's what we're spending our tax dollars on, is leadership that enacts things that the Supreme Court strikes down as being unconstitutional, and then them trying to refigure out how they can do the exact same thing. Oh, and then one more. We are not concerned about an inflationary effect. That's always fun. That's always fun. There's a great scene. If you never saw that movie, I think it was called Vice, and it was about Dick Cheney and the Bush administration. And there's that scene where someone comes to Dick Cheney and they're like, aren't you concerned about, or we have concerns about all the costs that you're spending on these wars and where this funding is coming from. And Dick Cheney's like, well, I don't share those concerns with you. Well, I still think it's a problem. We're not concerned about the inflationary effect of giving all this free money to people. And of course they should be. I think the prices overall are up like 20% since Biden is in office, and they've got another bad inflation report this past month coming down the wire into election season. This is going to be a weird election because you're going to have to basically decide between if you want to be able to afford things or get an abortion. That's where we are as a country. This is people's hierarchy of what they're voting for, is that you're going to have some women who are like, man, I'd really like to be able to afford things in my life again and not work a job where the prices are going up all the time. But I guess if I'm forced to have a kid that I didn't want to have, that's going to cost me a lot of money too. That's where we're at as a country. You get to pick, what amongst your hierarchy of what's actually important to you as a country. And the dueling things right now are whether or not I want to be able to afford things or have an abortion.
As Benjamin Franklin pointed out in 1779, I believe, the depreciation of the American paper is solely owing to the existence of excessive quantities. So he's pointing out that the more that they print, the less value it has, and that causes what we call price inflation today. And here's George Washington. Paper money has had the effect in your state. This is a letter to Jabez Bowen in Rhode Island. It has had the effect in your state that it ever will have, to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open a door to every species of fraud and injustice. So George Washington warned us that the monetary system we have today would ruin commerce. Correct. It oppresses the honest. Correct. And it opens the door to every species of fraud and injustice. We know that it has fueled the largest government in history. And that gave us a consolidated system that Thomas Jefferson warned would be filled with corruption, plunder, and waste. It looks like these guys absolutely nailed it. I don't want to get too deep into that particular thing because I want to look at this case study in Utah. But I do want to point you to an important episode that I did a couple of months ago, Tyranny 101, How the Federal Reserve Powers the Monster State. Without the Federal Reserve, the federal government wouldn't be able to do very much of what it does today. It wouldn't be able to run these massive debts and deficits. It would not be able to run all these programs, socialist, domestic, foreign policy. It would be naturally limited by the amount of money that it could spend. And without the borrowing power, the printing press of the Federal Reserve, it wouldn't be able to do too much. But let's get right to this. Mike Meharry, in a new article we published yesterday, points out that End the Fed is a popular slogan among supporters of sound money and actually supporters of the Constitution and liberty. It should be. But it's almost certain that Congress will never shut down its own money printer. So as the founders repeatedly advised, it's up to the people of the states to get the job done. And that's exactly the step-by-step kind of approach we've been seeing in Utah since 2011. There, a combination, Mike writes, of at least 4 state laws, plus plenty of steps forward by businesses and individuals, has built what is likely the most robust foundation for the advancement of gold and silver as money in the United States. The founders and old revolutionaries, Mike writes, understood this incremental approach and used it to great success, and started off in 2011 by laying the groundwork with the passage of something called the Utah Legal Tender Act. It made gold and silver coins issued by the federal government. That's it. Gold and silver coins issued by the federal government, legal tender in the state. It's something that all 50 states should have been doing all along as required by the Constitution, but they've all been ignoring it all along. So they actually started to turn things around in 2011. And Meharry puts it this way. It also specified, quote, that the exchange of gold and silver coins for another form of legal tender does not create any individual income or sales tax liability. In effect, it repealed both the state sales and capital gains taxes on gold and silver. And if you just a quick aside, and I've mentioned this on the show here, an analogy that Meharry has put together, he's like, basically, let's say you went to a store and you wanted to exchange one form of money for another, $5, and you want to get a different form for it. Hey, can you get me some change for this? And then they charge you a 35-cent tax. The odds of you doing that probably goes down unless you absolutely needed it. And that's what they've been doing with, for example, a sales tax on gold, because if you exchange gold or silver to something, they don't think you're just taking one form of money and swapping it for fiat dollars. Let's say you need $25 or whatever it is for an ounce of silver. Maybe it's closer to 30 now, and you wanted 30 notes of fiat for whatever dumb reason, but let's say you needed it. What they're actually considering that is a sale of the silver for the US dollar, and therefore they're going to collect a sales tax. And then on top of it, a lot of places they're going to charge you a capital gains tax, because if you purchase the silver at $20 and then now today it's worth $30, they're going to charge you another income tax on that $10 quote capital gains rather than treating it as money. When they tax it, they're basically saying that it is not money at all. It is a mere investment vehicle and it's discouraging its use. So removing the taxes, sales and capital gains on a state level in 2011 was a very, very important step. We thought it was probably pretty small at the time. But then again, in 2012, they followed up with a second bill expanding the Utah Legal Tender Act and then renaming it the Specie Legal Tender Act. So it's now the Specie Legal Tender Act. And Mike points out that most significantly, as the title suggests, the 2012 measure expanded the definition of specie legal tender beyond only coins authorized by the feds to include any gold and silver coins approved by the state. So now the state is making the determination of what gold and silver they're going to consider money. This is another step forward. It's not perfect freedom by any stretch of the imagination, but it does actually remove them from some control of the central government. So in 2019, because of the growth of one to the next, to the next, to the next, now we get something called the gold back. This is a local voluntary medium of exchange. They're dollar-denominated notes made from physical gold. So you basically have something that it's shaped like a paper dollar, but it's made out of actual gold. They created a process that turns pure gold into spendable physical form for small transactions. They're absolutely gorgeous. There's a premium, so they're not cheap to get, but there's something to it as well. Goldback describes it as the world's first physical interchangeable gold money that is designed to accommodate even small transactions. So this is another tool that's been built out of the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act because of it that allows people to actually spend with physical notes in small amounts. Rather than carrying out an ounce of gold or a tenth or a hundredth ounce of gold, they can actually break it down into ones and fives, etc. So they've been launched in a number of states, but it started in Utah. And the United Precious Metals Association General Counsel Larry Hilton, he noted that the Goldback is legal tender in the state of Utah only because of the Specie Legal Tender Act. Here from their website, this means that under Utah state law, Goldback is a voluntary legal tender in Utah. And Mike Meharry points out that it has been enthusiastically embraced throughout the state. The UPMA estimates that Goldback acceptance may be as high as 50% among small business owners. Now, I don't know if there's many or any big companies out there, but you can find it all over the place. And they list it on their website. There's gas stations and salons, all kinds of small businesses that are deciding, yes, we will accept it. Now, does that mean it's being used as money a ton? I don't know how to track that. But the more that you have this kind of adoption, the more that people put up signs that say it's accepted here, the more that people who are enthusiastic about real money rather than supporting the monster state that is Washington, D.C. and their vassal states that submit to them at every turn. Well, the more that you have this, the more that you can build this foundation. That's exactly what Thomas Jefferson pointed out. Every step, the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, and each one of these things is a step towards liberty.
Anytime McConnell wants to debate his Ukraine first policy with me in Kentucky, bring it on, is what Senator Paul said. And go to the next one. This is where he opens his piece. He says Mitch McConnell has pledged to fight GOP isolationism in the remainder of his career. I doubt that his self-appointed quest will improve support among Kentucky voters. In fact, McConnell has the lowest approval rate of any federally elected official ever. A recent Monmouth University poll showed McConnell with a 6% approval rate and a 6% disapproval rate. So anytime he wants to debate his Ukraine first policy with me in Kentucky, bring it on, he says.
This argument's been going on for a long time because there was a time when there was a slightly different interpretation of isolationism. Some people hoped that that term would represent isolating our weapons. But then it turned into isolationism as a negative term and that you were against freedom, free trade, free travel, and people getting along together in a voluntary way. And that, of course, is what we support. And this is something that they've been arguing about. And in Washington, unfortunately, the people who at least partially would agree with McConnell. We have Republicans that will go along. I mean, he was the leader of the Senate for all those years. So, and he was spending the money, and he was also wanting to interfere in the relationships with other countries. And this is something that comes to an end because it ends badly. And I think that what we have to do, though, is make sure people understand that you can have non-interventionism, which is a term I use. Rand uses a slightly different term. Non-intervention means that we mind our own business, but it means you get along with people voluntarily. And how do you solve the arguments and difficulties? In a free market, a libertarian society, you have to have honor and respect and voluntary obedience to what you agreed to, and that is the contract. If you didn't have a recognition of a contract, the market doesn't work, and that's one of the big problems we have today because the government regulates all contracts, and they rule over them. They say, oh no, that contract's no good, and matter of fact, the government sets the standard by never obeying their contracts, and that's where it is. But this thing is getting messy. I think there's going to be more debates like this. I was delighted to read this because he didn't avoid the challenge that McConnell threw out to him.
Yeah, can. This came out in FT, I think yesterday. You sent it over, and I looked at it and read it. And why U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor is facing calls to retire. And I first saw Dr. Paul and thought, did she have a scandal? Has she been falling asleep on the job? And actually, it's a lot sadder than that.
They're panicking. And, this is like everything else they've been doing lately. They're in a panic mode, and that's when you generally make mistakes. And this is probably a big mistake, just like all the way they were treating, Trump. Yeah. It backfires, and it usually would help Trump. And, one of the most outlandish quotes I've ever heard along this line was from the president when that the president I'm talking about is Biden. Everybody knows this. So he's talking to a black man, and evidently he was. I don't think the person he was talking to was outlandish. He was just sort of having a conversation. He says, "Well," and Biden gets mad. He says, "If you don't vote for me, you ain't black." I mean, what is the implication? That is such an insult, and everybody belongs to a group. I remember Walter Williams, a black professor who was raised in the slums by a single parent in Philadelphia, who went on to get a PhD and had a long teaching career. And I always liked when he expressed himself. He says, "Well, I never needed a black leader." So everybody wants a black leader. So, they think they do. They're the promoters that want to. So now they're saying, you ain't Hispanic, and we don't want you anymore. We've used you. And it's like throwing you out in the dirt. And there was one professor that sort of took up and said, but not the politician. This is pragmatism. Even the ones that were a lot older. What if you're 75 and you're in the Senate? You can do a lot of harm. But they wouldn't dare think about, well, we better get out of here because this is a bigger deal. This is the Supreme Court. So I wouldn't know her record. Obviously, she's liberal, and I don't know whether she has any independence. But the whole thing is the system shouldn't be this way. It has nothing to do with her talent, And like you said, you didn't know why they were doing this. You had to look around. What horrible thing did she do? Did she caught robbing a bank or something?
Well, let's look at what they say, because these two paragraphs, I picked them on purpose to put up here because the juxtaposition is so poignant. So it starts out by saying, when Barack Obama nominated Sonia Sotomayor, if we can put that up, to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2009, he said that when, quote, she ascends those marble steps to assume her seat, America will have taken another important step toward realizing the ideal that is etched above the entrance, equal justice under the law. And of course, what he meant is it's the first Hispanic woman to serve as a chief justice, as a justice on the Supreme Court. So he felt like there was a history being made. And then the next paragraph says, 15 years later, a debate has risen over whether the 69-year-old Sotomayor, the court's first Hispanic justice, should retire before the 2024 general election in order to give U.S. President Joe Biden the chance to replace her with a younger liberal. And as you say, that term is perfect. They used her up, and now they want to throw her out.
And then they couch these terms in when they brought her in, equal justice and all this. But is this equal treatment? Yeah. Is this even courteous? And it undermines it. It just devalues their belief on somebody that belongs to a minority. We as libertarians have no problem with that. We don't believe people get their rights from a collective group. You get it as an individual. So people shouldn't see this. This whole thing that people should be colorblind. Today we have the least colorblind society. Color approach to it. Everything is color, and statistics and promotions, everything else. So I think I can't help but say that on the immediate, not her philosophy on law, but as far as this skirmish, this political skirmish goes, she's getting ripped off. And who knows what she'll have to do, because you could put a lot of heat on a person like that and there'll be plenty of bribes.
Your code divides mankind into two castes and commands them to live by opposite rules. Those who may desire anything and those who may desire nothing. The chosen and the damned, the riders and the carriers, the eaters and the eaten. What standard determines your caste? What pass key admits you to the moral elite? The pass key is lack of value. Whatever the value involved, it is your lack of it that gives you a claim upon those who don't lack it. It is your need that gives you a claim to rewards. If you succeed, any man who fails is your master. If you fail, any man who succeeds is your serf. Whether your failure is just or not, whether your wishes are rational or not, whether your misfortune is undeserved or the result of your vices, it is misfortune that gives you a right to rewards. It is pain, regardless of its nature or cause. Pain is a primary absolute that gives you a mortgage on all of existence. A morality that holds need as a claim, holds emptiness, non-existence, as its standard of value. It rewards an absence, a defect. Weakness, inability, incompetence, suffering, disease, disaster, the lack, the fault, the flaw, the zero. Who provides the account to pay these claims? Those who are cursed for being non-zeros, each to the extent of his distance from that ideal. Your code declares that the rational man must sacrifice himself to the irrational, the independent man to parasites, the honest man to the dishonest, the man of justice to the unjust, the productive man to thieving loafers, the man of integrity to compromising knaves. Do you wonder at the meanness of soul in those you see around you? The man who achieves these virtues will not accept your moral code. The man who accepts your moral code will not achieve these virtues. Under a morality of sacrifice, the first value you sacrifice is morality. The next is self-esteem. When need is the standard, every man is both victim and parasite. As a victim, he must labor to fill the needs of others, leaving himself in the position of a parasite whose needs must be filled by others. He cannot approach his fellow men except in one of two disgraceful roles. He is both a beggar and a sucker. You fear the man who has $1 less than you. That dollar is rightfully his. He makes you feel like a moral defrauder. You hate the man who has $1 more than you. That dollar is rightfully yours. He makes you feel that you are morally defrauded. The man below is a source of your guilt. The man above is a source of your frustration. You do not know what to surrender or demand, when to give and when to grab, what pleasure in life is rightfully yours and what debt is still unpaid to others. You struggle to evade as theory the knowledge that by the moral standard you've accepted, you are guilty every moment of your life. There is no mouthful of food you swallow that is not needed by someone somewhere on earth. And you give up the problem in blind resentment. You conclude that moral perfection is not to be achieved or desired, that you will muddle through by snatching as snatch can, and by avoiding the eyes of the young, of those who look at you as if self-esteem were possible, and they expected you to have it. Guilt is all that you retain within your soul, and so does every other man as he goes past, avoiding your eyes. Do you wonder why your morality has not achieved brotherhood on earth or the goodwill of man to man? The justification of sacrifice that your morality propounds is more corrupt than the corruption it purports to justify. The motive of your sacrifice, it tells you, should be love.
Love humanity. Don't be ashamed or afraid to love.
The love you ought to feel for every man.
How can we show people that we love them? We have to have a vision where the wealth is shared, and not just shared within the borders of this country, shared with the people of the world.
Howdy, boys!
A morality that teaches you to scorn a whore who gives her body indiscriminately to all men. This same morality demands that you surrender your soul to promiscuous love for all comers. An emotion is a response to a fact of reality, an estimate dictated by your standards. To love is to value. Your morality demands that you divorce your love from values and hand it down to any vagrant.
Love in action is the living reality of the presence of Christ.
Not as response to his worth, but as response to his need. Not as reward, but as alms. Not as a payment for virtues, but as a blank check on vices. Your morality tells you that the purpose of love is to set you free of the bonds of morality, that love is superior to moral judgment, that true love transcends, forgives, and survives every manner of evil in its object, and the greater the love, the greater the depravity it permits to the loved. To love a man for his virtues is paltry and human, it tells you. To love him for his flaws is divine. To love those who are worthy of it is self-interest. To love the unworthy is sacrifice. You owe your love to those who don't deserve it, and the less they deserve it, the more love you owe them. The more loathsome the object, the nobler your love. The more unfastidious your love, the greater your virtue. And if you can bring your soul to the state of a dump heap that welcomes anything on equal terms, you have achieved the state of moral perfection. Such is your morality of sacrifice. Why do you now moan complaints about man's impotence and the futility of human aspirations? Because you were unable to find joy by worshiping pain. Because you were unable to prosper by seeking destruction. Because you were unable to live by holding death as your standard of value. The degree of your ability to live was the degree to which you broke your moral code. Yet you believe that those who preach it are friends of humanity. You damn yourself and dare not question their motives or their goals. Take a look at them now, when you face your last choice, and if you choose to perish, do so with full knowledge of how cheaply, how small an enemy has claimed your life. The mystics of both schools who preach the creed of sacrifice are germs that attack you through a single sword, your fear of relying on your mind. They tell you that they possess a means of knowledge higher than the mind, a mode of consciousness superior to reason, like a special pull with some bureaucrat of the universe who gives them secret tips withheld from others. The mystics of spirit declare that they possess an extra sense you lack. This special sixth sense consists of contradicting the whole of the knowledge of your five. The mystics of muscle do not bother to assert any claim to extrasensory perception. They merely declare that your senses are not valid. Both kinds demand that you invalidate your own consciousness and surrender yourself into their power. They offer you as proof of their superior knowledge the fact that they assert the opposite of everything you know, and as proof of their superior ability to deal with existence, the fact that they lead you to misery, self-sacrifice, starvation, destruction.
So Bloomberg reported on Wednesday that the U.S. and its allies believe that Iranian retaliation for the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Syria is imminent. Sources told Bloomberg that based on U.S. and Israeli intelligence, Iran or its allies in the region could launch a major missile and drone attack on military and government targets inside Israel in the coming days. There was other reports that said similar things, including one from Axios, that said Israel is expecting a direct Iranian attack on its territory launched from Iran's soil. And Israeli sources told the outlet that Israel would respond by launching direct attacks on Iran. That's what they're threatening. Now, Israel has a history of covert attacks inside Iran, assassinations, sabotage attacks, small little drone attacks that are launched from inside Iran, from intelligence assets inside Iran. But this sounds like they're talking about something different, like airstrikes. And realistically, Israel is not really capable of, they don't have heavy bombers that can fly long distances. They would need support from the U.S. to bomb Iran. And I think it's pretty clear that if Iran does something like this, that the U.S. is going to intervene directly. And so there's a lot of questions here. Are these officials, are these reports true? Or is Israel, are the U.S. trying to goad Iran into something? I think it's clear that's exactly what Israel's doing here. They want to provoke a huge war, get the U.S. directly involved. I think that's hard to argue at this point. So President Biden on Wednesday walked back a call for Israel to declare a 6 to 8 week ceasefire in Gaza, saying that the truce must be tied to a hostage deal and that it was up to Hamas. So these comments came a day after an interview aired where Biden appeared to say that Israel should unilaterally declare a temporary ceasefire. And if that is what Biden wanted, that would have been a big shift in policy. I didn't see this, but according to the Times of Israel, the White House already walked back what he said, saying that he was referring to a hostage deal that's being negotiated. But Biden said in a press conference on Wednesday, quote, "It's now up to Hamas. They need to move on the proposal that has been made so we can get these hostages home where they belong. It also brings back a 6-week ceasefire that we need now," end quote. So I've been covering some hostage deal stuff. It's really tough to know exactly what's going on, but there's no indication right now that a deal is going to be reached. Hamas is still saying that they want permanent ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli troops. Netanyahu's not going for that, obviously. But there is also signs that maybe Hamas is willing to compromise on a deal for a 6-week ceasefire, but some of their main demands for that are still not being met. One of them being Palestinians giving them the ability to return to northern Gaza, the ones who fled from there. And that's something Israel does not want to do. Well, the Biden administration has admitted that it massively undercounted what it has spent on the proxy war in Ukraine. And this was reported by the American Conservative on Tuesday. It was an exclusive over there. The report said that the White House's Office of Management and Budget had previously estimated the U.S. has spent $111 billion on the war. And for over a year, a group of members of Congress pressed the OMB, that's the White House Office of Management and Budget, and they pressed them to figure out the real number, and recently found that it was $125 billion, $14 billion more than what the White House had previously claimed. In a letter sent to the director of the OMB on Tuesday, Senator J.D. Vance, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and 15 other members of Congress said that they, quote, now have confirmation from OMB that the total Ukraine spending figure is significantly higher than the administration has ever admitted, end quote. The lawmakers asked OMB Director Shalonda Young to answer a series of questions about U.S. spending on the proxy war and gave her a deadline of April 30th to answer these questions. And the letter also noted that the Biden administration still has $4 billion in what they call presidential drawdown authority for Ukraine. That lets the U.S. send weapons directly from military stockpiles. The Pentagon hasn't used it because they say they don't have the money to replace the weapons. And this $4 billion is funds that they magically found. They said, we found an accounting error that overvalued the weapons for Ukraine, and it gave them another $6 billion, and they used about $2 billion of it. So they have $4 billion left, but they say they don't have money to replace the weapons. Yet we have seen them figure out ways to still send weapons to Ukraine. Last month, they announced the new $300 million arms package for Ukraine, and they claim that they found the money from the U.S. Army budget. Even though you've had the Pentagon say that they need $10 billion to replace things they've sent to Ukraine. It just doesn't make any sense, the things that they're saying. And we know that they could always just find the money if they want. So Anyway, I mean, that's a pretty big margin of error there, $14 billion more. This is an article from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a group of 19 House Republicans bucked GOP leadership and voted with Democrats against a bill that would extend Section 702 of FISA, and this is the law that allows for mass surveillance and the collection of Americans' data. On Wednesday, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson brought the legislation up for a procedural vote, and it failed 193 to 228. The Republican opposition was made up of a group of freedom-oriented representatives led by Matt Gaetz. Gaetz said in a statement, quote, "The reauthorization lacks essential reforms to protect Americans' Fourth Amendment rights, such as requiring the FBI to obtain a warrant before searching Americans' data and a prohibition on the government purchasing Americans' data from third-party data brokers. FISA authorities have been used to violate the law more than 278,000 times by the national security state, and there has yet to be any consequences for this illegal activity by our government," end quote. So he criticized Speaker Johnson for letting this bill come to the floor without the reforms. So Trump, before the vote, he posted on his Truth social media site, I'll just read. He said, quote, "Kill FISA. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied on my campaign," end quote, which is true. But Trump also signed an extension of the program when he was in the White House. So got to point that out.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
The important things going around the world are not being reported because you got a bunch of shitheads in charge, and all they're interested in is blowing up crap so they give you more stuff to listen to. And of course, all they do is they listen to their government whoremasters. Yeah, the politicians. That's why you get these T-shirts. Hey, politician, who the fuck are you to tell me what to do? They're nothing more than prostitutes. They suck up to their corporate pimps and their government whoremasters. And that's who's running the show. So moving on to the economy. Gold prices, man, it could be $3,000 this year. Remember what I just said. That gold is going up under these conditions is really important. I have not seen a rise in gold. My first buy in gold was in the late 1970s, like $183, $163 an ounce. Yeah. I made almost $500,000 more, about almost $750,000 playing the futures markets in gold and oil when the Iranian conflict was going on. I lost a lot of it, out of my mind, man. But I held on to a lot of it, and that's when I started the Trends Journal. I became a political atheist. They just taught us to hate Iran without any of the facts. And I said, as everybody's hating Iran, what will oil and gold prices do? I started playing the futures markets. So going on about what in the world is going on and how bad it is. This is from Bloomberg. Credit card delinquency rates were worst on record in Fed study. Oh, everything's fine. The rich are getting richer. The plantation workers of slave land are getting poorer. And the fucking credit card companies? Hey, the mafia is charging 10%. We could charge 29% or more. You got to pay now, buy now, pay later. We'll get you left a lot more. Oh, yeah, we're a member of the bankster gangsters. The ones that the Prince of Peace. You got the cover right there. Nothing's changed. So the credit card delinquencies are important. This thing's going to go down. Oil prices go up. People can't afford it. And yeah, commodity rally poses inflation risk. Yeah, no shit. Says AI will outsmart humans by next year. The humans are dumber than shit. They're outsmarted already. You're a year late. The Taylor Swift get fucked up. Chip facilities get billions to bolster production, right? Washington. The Biden administration will award up to $6.6 billion of the taxpayers of Slavelandia's money in grants to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. We're giving the fucking money to Taiwan? And why are we giving money to anybody? Hey, fuckfaces, you ever hear of capitalism? This is fascism. It's the merger of state and corporate powers. Oh, that's not my words. That's that guy Mussolini. Yeah. When we were kids, I remember, I'm born in 1946 after the war. Whistle while you work. Hitler is a jerk. Mussolini bit his weenie. Now it doesn't work. Yeah, that Mussolini. It's fascism. Giving all these corporation tax breaks. I'm going to create jobs. Give me free money. Give me the money for the plantation workers. Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir, because you give us campaign contributions, bribes and payoffs. Anyway, what else we got here? OpenAI and Meta poised to make AI leap with more models skilled, quote, in reasoning. Yep, we lost all our reasoning, and the younger generation's totally gone with it. It is the future. Again, the Trends Journal, right here. Facts. .com this. We call it .com bust. Said it would happen by the second quarter of 2000. This is when it was quarterly magazine, and this is in the fall of 1999. .com fell in March of 2020, of 2000. AI is totally different. Trends are born, they grow, they mature, reach old age, and die. This trend has just been born. As much as I hate it, I'm telling every young person out there, every person that wants to be an on-trendpreneur, learn all about it. It's just begun. Big story in today's Wall Street Journal. Again, we warned about this, the office building bust in May of 2000, when they started sending everybody home. You can't go to work, you got to work from home. You ready? The real estate nightmare unfolding in downtown St. Louis. Downtown St. Louis? The fucking nightmares unfolding in downtowns all across the country. And that's going to bring the banking bust because they're going to be defaults on loans. But you read this story, it's horrible. In Anchors, they go talking about this. The Railway Exchange building was the heart of downtown St. Louis for a century. Every day, local crowds in the sprawling, ornate 21-story office building to go to work, shop at the department store that filled its lower floors, would dine on the famous French onion soup at its restaurant. Today, the building sits empty. It anchors a neighborhood with deserted sidewalks sprinkled with broken glass and tiny pieces of copper left behind by scavengers. Signs suggest visitors should, quote, park in well-lit areas. Isn't that great? As offices sit empty, shops and restaurants close, and abandoned buildings become voids that suck the life out of the street around them. We warned about this for years. Hardly talked about, not a word about what this is going to do to the banks. When there's going to be a banking bust, a banking failure that's going to crash equity markets and drive gold prices much higher.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Whenever any of these public officials post, one of their piles of platitudes, like for example, just the other day, I think it was Secretary of State Blinken posted something about how, in this month of women, this Women's Month or Women's History Month or whatever month it is, it's always something, isn't it? But in this month, and in this particular day, I'm thinking about the women who have served as Secretary of State of the United States and how they've advanced U.S. foreign policy. Then you look in the comments, and there's almost nobody saying, "You're right, Secretary Blinken, we're really proud of these female Secretaries of State." The whole comment section is, "Oh, what a relief that now women are in a position to incinerate foreigners for no good reason and carry out our holy and unquestionable bipartisan foreign policy." I mean, it's all cynicism. The entire comment section it is entirely pushing back. There is no Anthony Blinken cheerleading section. It's all people who are fully awake and fully understand what's going on. So it's such an odd situation that there are so many people who don't in any way buy these platitudes, and yet the rest of society acts like this is normal, like Anthony Blinken is somebody to listen to, like the platitudes are meaningful, or Hillary Clinton is somehow admirable. It's weird, and I wish it would somehow resolve itself at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that people are unhappy and they complain, and there's the cynicism, as you point out, but nobody is prepared to take a stand on anything, and I'm not really sure why that is. So for example, people will complain about hate crimes or anything that's introduced. They will, but if anybody stands up and says, "Let's get rid of hate crimes, let's abolish it," they all suddenly go quiet. Nobody wants to stand for what they're actually saying is the correct thing to do. And what I think is the reason for that, as far as I can see, is that people feel like taking a stand in some odd way is going too far. Complaining is fine because all we're doing is complaining. But if somebody says, well, actually stand up against this, it feels like it's going too far. And people always want to seem measured and balanced and not extremist. And I think there's just a sense that if you're actually proposing to do anything, that's an extremist position.
Well,
they don't have to cave, but they do.
You've criticized people who have said things like, DEI may be well-intentioned, but it has all these terrible consequences. And you stop them right there at the very beginning and say it is not well-intentioned.
No.
Now, we used to say in the old days, oh, these are well-intentioned government policies that have unanticipated consequences and whatever, or unintended consequences. And by the way, I'm sure some policies are invented by dumb people who can't think 3 steps ahead, and they do have unintended consequences. But for the most part, when a policy yields a particular outcome again and again and again, whatever it is, anti-poverty programs give you more poverty, whatever it is, when they yield the same results over and over and over again, I think at that point you have to assume that the intention of the policy is what it does. You have to assume that.
It is, of course, it's not unintentional or anything like that, because let's remember these people, there's a small cohort. Okay, a lot of them are just along for the ride, or they're stupid or whatever, but there's a small cohort of committed people. They're socialists, so this is what they want to achieve. They're not achieving it by accident. They did not accidentally transform equal opportunities into equal outcomes because they weren't paying attention. That's exactly what they want to achieve. They're being treated as if they were it somehow went wrong along the way, but that's their actual goal, and they said that's their goal.
But what do you say then to people who, at least rhetorically, will say, look, all we're trying to do is overturn historical injustices and level the playing field. A lot of people have been treated badly in the past, so we can't give them equal opportunity. So we're going to have to give them a boost through DEI. And, whoever is displaced will find something somewhere. But for heaven's sake, we got to integrate everybody into the society, and it's not happening organically, so it's going to have to happen through state intervention.
These are the most dangerous people. They are more dangerous than Marxists. See, a Marxist comes at you from the front and says, I'm a Marxist and I want to abolish, private ownership of the means of production. So you can see your enemy and you can have some kind of debate with that person. They can try to persuade people to Marxism, and you can try to show why Marxism doesn't work. And it's a fair battle. But the people you describe, these are the worst kind of enemy because they purport to agree with you. They will say, oh, yes, Marxism is wrong. Equal outcomes is wrong. I'm not into that. All I want to do is equal opportunities. We just want to achieve justice. These are the most dangerous people. These are actually the people that Tom Sowell was talking about in his chapter on the quiet repeal of the American Revolution. He says the people repealing the American Revolution are not the self-identified communists who say, I'm a communist and I want to revolt. Those are not the dangerous people. He says the dangerous people are the ones who say, all we're doing is equality, and all we're doing is, as you say, giving people opportunities. Meanwhile, they're dismantling the American Constitution. So that's what I would say. These people are not harmless. They look harmless, and that's why they're more dangerous.
Does need a revamping for sure.
All right, let's move on. This is another one about inflation with a little bit different of a twist. But this is submitted by David P. LeVay. And if we can put that up, can you analyze the impact on inflation caused by Trump versus Biden? Republicans keep calling Biden the inflation king, but inflation print seems more accurate. Trump still holds the record for the first and second largest socialist bills signed into law in human history.
That's a good question because that shows an understanding of what's going on. And if you're a loyal Republican and you do a good job to try to be a good conservative, then when a person like Biden comes in a week after he's in, there might be an economic incident, something, prices go up or something like that, and they say, "Oh, it's the Democrats, they did it." It's not that's I think a negative because it's not exactly true. You don't have this type of inflation where prices are going up all over the place. If you wait a few months, everything, say, well, it's Biden's fault, it's Biden's fault. He aggravates it, he makes it worse, he participates in it. I'd say probably his votes as a senator overall probably did more harm than his week or two or a month or two being in the presidency. But certainly his encouragement to have big government, whether it's for war or welfare, he's a participant because that's one of the incentives that's put on and pressures put on the Fed to accommodate, because the Fed always knows they have to take care of the deficit. They're never going to say, if you had a Secretary of the Treasury come up and say, okay, you're over our limits, we're not going to issue any more debt. That would be a calamity, for the marketplace. So they would say, no, you have to do it. So the Fed always does it. So whether it's the Congress or the president, they're responsible. But then when you look at it, I think we frequently have said on this program, and I think libertarians are very much aware of the fact that inflation should be blamed on just about all the politicians. There's a few, we know a few that don't vote for all this spending and deficit, but that is few and in between, because they keep saying that they want to blame somebody in particular, and they can't. But it's ingrained in our system. It's been taught in our university. They have rejected. Remember the question I asked Bernanke, what was gold money? Oh, no, it's not gold money. Yet it was the elimination of gold, the final elimination of gold from our standard in 1971 that has been one of the motivating factors for me to want to spend a little bit of time talking about this issue.
If we can put up Sleepy's profile. He says, would you accept the position of Fed chairman if it was offered to you by Trump?
I wonder if he was sleeping when he asked that question. If they offer me, no, the answer should be no, because why would I want to join a bunch of people that are, well, I was going to use some strong word, a gang, a gang of criminals, because they're the orchestrators of counterfeiting. And so, no, it wouldn't work. Let's say I go in with a sincere interest in doing it. And yeah, what if he did what I just mentioned in the other question, is what if somebody sent the bills, sent Treasury, sent the debt over to it, and the Federal Reserve refuses to buy the government debt. That's a big deal. I mean, the world financial system really comes down. Because the people would be reneging on that paper asset. But what is interesting though is we always honor that to prevent the crashing coming up suddenly. Because if today they said we're not going to buy any more government debt, there would be a calamity out there. But the answer to that really is, if you don't stop this nonsense, there's still going to be a calamity, because what they're paying these bills with would go, become less valuable. And when you think of the evaluation of what's been going on, in the Fed's history, taking the ratio of gold to the dollar, $20 to an ounce, now it's at more than $2,000. I mean, this is astronomical, so to speak. But if it gets real big, then you have that calamity of somebody stomping. So I don't think it would be worth my effort to go and say, well, maybe we'll have a little meeting here, and we'll talk about where the inflation is coming from. No, that's not going to work, and people wouldn't like it, and it would be very chaotic. There would be some people who could protect themselves, as we all must try to do that. And protecting against inflation is a big deal. It's hard and difficult because if you don't have your freedom, it makes it more difficult. There are some people trying to protect against the problems that we had in the 1930s, and the very first thing that Roosevelt did was confiscate the gold from the people and turn it over to the government, and then they devalued and inflated the currency. So it's one of the reasons why I always go back. You want your freedom to be responsible for yourself and accept that responsibility. At the same time, that you can do what you want, but you have to protect yourself. And if you have trouble, you have to be responsible for that. And that is very difficult. But that's what we have to have, because if you do all the things, we can list 6 or 7 things that people have done to try to protect against the encroachment of government when they try to save a system that's not deserving of being saved. That is like the monetary system, and do whatever you can, because the more they try to save by printing money, the more difficult it's going to be. So that is the reason. So it is going to be the principle of liberty, which includes, of course, once again, a currency which is illegal to counterfeit. The founders actually believed if you were a counterfeit of the government's money, that they were going to issue the death penalty for doing that. They thought the counterfeiting of money was a serious matter, but they didn't point out the Fed back then. They were still arguing about whether we should have a Fed. But anyway, we're where we are right now, and I'm still arguing the case that you need sound money and freedom to solve our problems.
They claim that they perceive a mode of being superior to your existence on this earth. The mystics of spirit call it another dimension. The mystics of muscle call it the future.
Even if we're unsure exactly what that looks like, even if we don't yet precisely know how we're going to get there, we know we'll get there.
To exist is to possess identity. What identity are they able to give to their superior realm? They keep telling you what it is not, but never tell you what it is. All their identifications consist of negating. God is that which no human mind can know, they say, and proceed to demand that you consider it knowledge. God is non-man. Heaven is non-earth. Soul is non-body. Virtue is non-profit. A is non-A. What is the nature of that superior world to which they sacrifice the world that exists?
I'm Mr. Sparkle, and I'd like to tell you about the place called Heaven. Heaven, the place where the Lord God Almighty dwells. Let us compare it to New York City. If the New Jerusalem were only 1,500 feet tall...
They're non-material, non-profit worlds. Are realms where rivers run with milk and coffee, where wine spurts from rocks at their command, where pastry drops on them from clouds at the price of opening their mouth.
Does this excite you? Think about it. Does it not stagger the imagination? No builder on earth can conceive any structure to compare to the mansions above. Won't that be something when you go to live in your old mansion? There'll be no concern about paying for it. It's already taken care of. There'll be no worry of being moved out of it. It will be yours forever.
On this material, profit-chasing earth, an enormous investment of virtue, of intelligence, integrity, energy, skill, is required to construct a railroad to carry them the distance of 1 mile. In their non-material, non-profit world, they travel from planet to planet at the cost of a wish. If an honest person asks them, how? They answer with righteous scorn, somehow.
Behold, I make all things new. This means there's no aging in heaven. In fact, age is unknown when we get our glorified bodies. Here we see a typical example. Won't that be amazing? Wouldn't you enjoy living in a place like that?
Welcome home, beloved of God. Welcome to a place where sin and Satan cannot enter. Welcome to a place where death cannot come. Welcome to a place where loneliness is never felt.
On this earth restricted by matter and profit, rewards are achieved by thought. In a world set free of such restrictions, rewards are achieved by wishing. And that is the whole of their shabby secret, the secret of all their esoteric philosophies. The secret for which they destroy civilization, language, industries, and lives. The secret for which they pierce their own eyes and eardrums, grind out their senses, blank out their minds. The purpose for which they dissolve the absolutes of reason, logic, matter, existence, reality, is to erect upon that plastic fog a single holy absolute. Their wish. The restriction they seek to escape is the law of identity. The freedom they seek is freedom from the fact that an A will remain an A no matter what their tears or tantrums. That a river will not bring them milk, no matter what their hunger. That water will not run uphill, no matter what comforts they could gain if it did. And if they want to lift it to the roof of a skyscraper, they must do it by a process of thought and labor, in which the nature of an inch of pipeline counts, but their feelings do not. That their feelings are impotent to alter the course of a single speck of dust in space, or the nature of any action they have committed. Those who tell you that man is unable to perceive a reality undistorted by his senses mean that they are unwilling to perceive a reality undistorted by their feelings. Things as they are things as perceived by your mind. Divorce them from reason and they become things as perceived by your wishes. There is no honest revolt against reason. And when you accept any part of their creed, your motive is to get away with something your reason would not permit you to attempt. Your teachers, the mystics of both schools, have reversed causality in their consciousness, then strive to reverse it in existence.
Question is, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
Notion of abstract potential existence out of a unified field, or superstring field. And that's what we're made of.
Quantum physics has revealed what ancient masters knew. Matter does not exist. The concept of substance arose from the philosophy of Aristotle. And from that concept came science's conception of matter. The fact of the matter is that the substance of the universe is consciousness. Belief that the substance of the universe is matter leads to what I call a fear-greed dichotomy, as people in their quiet desperation attempt to accumulate as many material possessions and riches as possible.
Thoughts become things, not sometimes, but all of the time. And not just our positive thoughts, but the other ones too. Because it's an immutable law, as rigid and predictable as gravity.
Your thoughts and your feelings create your reality.
The reason why my life, for instance, is so lacking in joy and happiness and fulfillment is because my focus is lacking in those same things exactly.
What kind of a house do you want to live in?
Do you want to be a millionaire?
What kind of a business do you want to have?
Do you want more success?
What do you really want?
They want to cheat the axiom of existence and consciousness. They want their consciousness to be an instrument not of perceiving, but of creating existence. An existence to be not the object, but the subject of their consciousness. They want to be that God they created in their image and likeness, who creates a universe out of a void by means of an arbitrary whim. But reality is not to be cheated. What they achieve is the opposite of their desire. They want an omnipotent power over existence. Instead, they lose the power of their consciousness. By refusing to know, they condemn themselves to the horror of a perpetual unknown.
There's a part of our brain that we have no control. That when the Holy Ghost is interceding for us, we're out of control.
Whenever you committed the evil of refusing to think and to see, of exempting from the absolute of reality some one small wish of yours, whenever you chose to say, let me withdraw from the judgment of reason, the cookies I stole, or the existence of God, let me have my one irrational whim and I will be a man of reason about all else. That was the act of corrupting your mind. Your mind then became a fixed jury who takes orders from a secret underworld, whose verdict distorts the evidence to fit an absolute it dares not touch. And a censored reality is the result, a splintered reality, where the bits you chose to see are floating among the chasms of those you didn't, held together by that embalming fluid of the mind, which is an emotion exempted from thought.
So Samantha Power, who is the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, or just USAID, she said on Wednesday that some parts of northern Gaza are already experiencing famine, which of course has been created by this U.S.-backed Israeli bombardment and siege on the Gaza Strip. So Power made these comments in a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing when asked about a cable sent by U.S. aid to other U.S. government agencies that said famine was already likely taking place in parts of northern Gaza, and the cable also called the spread of hunger and disease unprecedented in modern history. And again, this is a U.S. government agency that is saying this. And Power said that the cable was based on a report from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, and she told lawmakers that the assessment was credible. And she was asked if that meant famine was already occurring in northern Gaza, and she replied yes. She said, quote, "Food has not flowed in sufficient quantities to avoid this imminent famine in the south, and these conditions that are already giving rise already to child deaths in the north," end quote. A top U.S. government official saying, yeah, famine is already taking place in some parts of Gaza, yet the U.S. is continuing to support the military that is causing it. And Power, there's a lot to be said about her. She's she was in the Obama administration, and she, along with Hillary Clinton, really pushed for the intervention in Libya, which was a total disaster. She fancies herself as an expert on genocide, yet she's part of a government that is aiding and abetting this slaughter and starvation of Palestinian civilians and children in the Gaza Strip. So there's a lot we could say about her, but just the fact that here we have the head of a major, U.S. government agency saying this, it just really shows how shameful all of this is. And President Biden has refused to even call for a ceasefire. He walked back those comments that sounded like he was calling for one without any sort of hostage deal. So that's not happening. And last week, Israel said that it would take steps to increase the flow of aid into Gaza, including the opening of the Erez border crossing into northern Gaza and allowing shipments to come through Israel's port of Ashdod. But neither commitment has been implemented. There was another report from the New York Times on Thursday that says the border crossing still hasn't been open. And it also said that the UN is disputing Israel's numbers of aid trucks that are entering Gaza. So famine is happening. The U.S. is enabling and supporting it. And this somehow continues. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida delivered an address to Congress on Thursday and declared China the greatest strategic challenge facing the world. I feel like this went very unnoticed, but this was a foreign leader coming in and addressing Congress and saying all this very hawkish stuff about China, and everybody standing up and giving him a big round of applause throughout the speech. So he said, quote, "Close coordination between Japan and the U.S. is required more than ever to ensure that deterrence that our alliance provides remains credible and resilient. China's current external stance and military actions present the unprecedented and the greatest strategic challenge not only to the peace and security of Japan, but to the peace and the stability of the international community at large," end quote. He also praised the U.S. for its role in leading the Western proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. Kishida said, quote, "The Ukraine of today may be the East Asia of tomorrow. The leadership of the United States is indispensable. Without U.S. support, how long before the hopes of Ukraine would collapse under the onslaught from Moscow," end quote. Without U.S. support, how quickly would have Zelensky signed a peace deal? So that was, he didn't say that, obviously. That was me. But a day earlier, so this was on Thursday that he addressed Congress. The day before, Biden hosted Kishida in this big dinner at the White House, and the two leaders announced new steps to bolster the U.S.-Japan alliance, including an upgrade to military command and control structures to facilitate more military cooperation. They said in a joint statement, quote, "We announce our intention to bilaterally upgrade our respective command and control frameworks to enable seamless integration of operations and capabilities and allow for greater interoperability and planning between U.S. and Japanese forces in peacetime and during contingencies," end quote. They also announced plans to increase joint weapons production and the potential inclusion of Japan in the AUKUS military pact. That's that military alliance that was formed between the US, Australia, and the UK. Started in 2021. It's focused on technology sharing. They're going to sell Australia some nuclear-powered submarines, and eventually Australia is going to be able to make their own. It's going to take decades and decades and cost like hundreds of billions of dollars. It's completely insane. Articles from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. A top U.S. commander told Congress that NATO was prepared for a massive troop surge in Eastern Europe. The alliance has already positioned thousands of troops in its most eastward states. This is General Christopher Cavoli, head of U.S. European Command, told Congress on Wednesday that NATO is prepared to triple its troop deployments to Eastern Europe. And so this is something that they've been talking about. I believe the U.S. sent something like 20,000 troops to Europe, and most of them went to Eastern Europe, to Romania, to Poland, to these countries either bordering Ukraine, and then also in the Baltic states that actually border Russia. And Kyle mentions the story I covered earlier this week of Germany just started its first permanent military deployment in Lithuania. So this is something that kind of a long-term plan, I think, to keep building up in Eastern Europe, and also in the new NATO countries in Finland and Sweden. And Finland, of course, has a huge border with Russia, and the U.S. is going to get access to a bunch of bases there.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You know, I did hear some people, though, on CNBC finally saying what I was saying over the last couple of weeks, which is, why is everybody talking about when the Fed is going to start cutting rates or how many rate cuts we're going to have when the Fed should be hiking rates? And so they're now starting to say, maybe we're not going to get any cuts. They're not saying that we're going to get hikes. They're saying that's no, that's never going to happen. But they are starting to question the validity of the cuts. But nobody is questioning the reality of the fact that they should never have stopped hiking. That's what the rising gold price is signaling, that interest rates are too low and that they need to go up. Not just in the U.S., they need to go up everywhere. The Europeans, the ECB has to raise rates. The Bank of England has to raise rates. The Bank of Japan has to raise rates. Everybody has to raise rates sharply. I'm not talking about, mamby-pamby quarter-point rate hikes. We need 200 basis point hikes. We need serious. The central bankers need to know that let the markets know that they mean business. The central bankers have to let the governments know that they mean business, that, hey, you guys better cut your spending. You can't run these big fiscal deficits because we're raising rates. You can't afford to finance the debt, so you better get rid of the debt by getting rid of the deficits, right? That's what has to happen. That's what gold is telling you, and everybody is ignoring it. So gold at its peak was up about $60 early in the morning. The high that we hit was about 2,430. That's already better than a 20% move above 2,000. So we are way above what used to be resistance. That's now distance support. And I was saying on this podcast, in fact, the last time gold went below 2,000, I said that's the last time. I said this is gold's final shakeout. This is your last chance to get it below 2,000. It was back above 2,000 a day or two later, and it never looked back. And now we've moved up more than 20% from 2,000. We ain't going back. So if you didn't buy gold below 2,000 when I was, screaming at you to buy it, well, you can't. You're not going to buy it below 2,000 again. You probably won't be able to buy it below 2,200. You can buy it below 2,400 because it's sold off. Maybe you'll be able to get to buy it below 2,300, but I don't know. This rally is going to continue because nobody even realizes it's happening. Americans are still selling. They're still liquidating their gold. That's how dumb they are, or we are. I mean, I'm an American. But the rallies have really all started in the Asian time zone. All the sell-offs happen here. The same thing happened today. We got a sell-off here, although we extended the rally first. So I think some buyers came in, but then the sellers came back. So gold got as high as 24.30. And again, when the markets open up on Sunday night, Monday in Asia, they're going to be looking at a buying opportunity because the smart money is buying gold and silver. The central banks, the foreign central banks, gold has been moving from west to east. So we sell, they buy. And so I believe there's going to be buying coming in to the gold and silver market. Maybe there'll be an initial sell-off on the follow-through with what we did. But I expect big buyers to come in, as they have been over the past several months. The sellers are here. Why? Because Americans are dumb. They're selling their real gold to buy fool's gold, Bitcoin ETFs. The West, or the East rather, is taking advantage of our greed and ignorance, and they're buying real gold as much as they can get their hands on, because this is a significant event. This is the beginning of the end of dollar hegemony, the U.S. dominance of the global economy, the dollar's days as the world reserve currency are numbered. Foreign central banks don't want dollars. They don't want treasuries, even if we pay them 5% to hold them, because they know that that's still a losing proposition, because inflation is going to be higher than that. And again, hotter than expected inflation does not mean the Fed just has to fight a little harder to win. It means the Fed has already lost. Inflation won. The fight is over. And you buy gold. And so what happened? So on Wednesday, we got the CPI. And the expectation was for a 0.3% rise, which if you annualize that is still well north of the 2% target that the Fed claims we're on a glide path to hit. The prior month was 0.4. So we ended up getting 0.4 again. So ahead of the 0.2% that people were expecting. But if you figure we've got 0.4 2 months in a row for CPI, well, what if you annualize that? You know, we got it 2 months, so annualize it 6 more times. That's 5% inflation. 5 seems like it's a lot higher than 2. And if you're at 5 right now, and you're trending up, right, because we bottomed out lower. We've been trending higher in inflation for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, I forget. We bottomed out around 3.1 year over year. The year over year now is 3.5. And the year over year core is 3.8. So we never actually got even close to 2. And now we're headed back up. So based on that data, how does the Fed conclude that we're likely headed down to 2 and that they can start cutting rates? I mean, if you were objective and just looking at the CPI, you would say, oh, we better hike rates. Inflation is going up, not down. But they're still saying, no, we're expecting to cut rates. Why? Based on what would you expect to cut rates? Certainly not based on the data.
And started out with something called the North Carolina Provincial Congress. This is a very revolutionary move at the time, and Wikipedia describes it as extra-legal unicameral legislative bodies formed in 1774 through 1776 by the people of the province of North Carolina, independent of British colonial government. So what they were doing is they were forming their own representative or legislative bodies, despite the fact that, well, the parliament said, you really can't do this. This was very revolutionary at the time. And eventually, sooner or later, when you're taking on the empire, you got to start organizing whether they approve of it or not. And that's what they were showing us here. But anyways, there were 5 of them from 74 through 76 in North Carolina. They met in the towns of New Bern, the 1st and 2nd, Hillsborough, number 3, and Halifax was the 4th and 5th. Now, I think the 3rd one they're all very important, but later in 1775, we have the 3rd one. And this is where you really see kind of a ramping up, especially later in the year after Lexington and Concord had kicked off in April of that year, where they were really prepping for a military response. And the Congress then divided the state or the colony into 6 military districts for the purposes of organizing militia and for determining representation on a new provincial council. These districts included Edenton, Halifax, Hillsborough, New Bern, Salisbury, and Wilmington. Now, shortly after this, we have actually in February of 1776, I think it was the 27th, this is the first battle in the War for Independence in North Carolina. It's actually a very important one, but it's not discussed real often. We often think just Lexington and Concord, and then everything just went to town at that point. But this was a battle that happened at Moores Creek Bridge. Here from NCpedia, they describe it like this: called the Lexington and Concord of the South. It's kind of a big deal. The Battle of Moores Creek Bridge was significant for several reasons. First of all, it marked the permanent end of royal authority in North Carolina. I mean, by the time this had already happened, they were already organizing their own system without British approval. But this really hammered it home. It also prevented the British from seizing control of the South at the onset of the war. And it was also a very primary motivation for the next provincial Congress, which started very shortly after in April of 1776. And here's how Kelly Slapey at North Carolina History puts it. The Patriot victory was fresh on the minds of the members of the 4th Provincial Congress when they reconvened on April 4th, 1776 in Halifax. Independence seemed imminent. Colonel Robert Howe remarked to the assembly, quote, "Independence seems to be the word. I know of not one dissenting voice." If you think about what was going on, this radical change in the viewpoints of the people during the Revolution before the shots were fired at Lexington and Concord and also at Moores Creek Bridge, for example, the radical change was an understanding that all power flows from the people and government is really just an agent of them. We shouldn't be surprised that when Parliament heard things like that, there was going to be a conflict. But when you're thinking about government doing things that they're not supposed to do, committing treason by usurpations, that's a pretty big deal. So they go through listing they're concerned about dealing with all these usurpations and violences. And that was also a very similar phrase used in the Declaration of Independence. They talk about how we went through moderation. We've tried to go back to peacefully on constitutional principles, but they have procured no mitigation of the aforesaid wrongs and usurpations, and no hopes remain of obtaining redress by those means alone, which have been hitherto tried. Your committee are of the opinion that the House should enter into the following resolve. So this is what they recommended. Resolved that the delegates for this colony in the Continental Congress be empowered to concur with the delegates of the other colonies in declaring independency and forming foreign alliances, reserving to this colony the sole and exclusive right of forming a constitution and laws for this colony, and of appointing delegates from time to time under the direction of a general representation thereof to meet the delegates of the other colonies for such purposes as shall be hereafter pointed out. So in other words, they're saying we're authorizing you to vote for, not propose, but vote for independence with the other colonies, form foreign alliances, and create our own constitution. And here from Jason Mandrish over at Founder of the Day, he points out that this was the first instance of a rebel government officially admitting reconciliation was no longer an option. It wasn't even on the table anymore for them in Halifax at that point. And although the North Carolina delegation had been informed that they were to support independence, well, they were specifically told not to motion for a vote. I mean, they didn't put it in those words, but they said you are authorized to vote with others on independence. And although he said this may seem strange, it was a very calculated move. And this was for a reason, because all the delegates in Congress, unlike what we have today, took their responsibility to represent their colonies, their states, very seriously. And if you think about the representation in the Continental Congress, that's very similar to how the structure was originally supposed to be under the Constitution, representing the states, reporting back to the states, following some instructions potentially. If a motion was made to declare independence, everyone else at that time probably would have said no. So North Carolina received updated instructions. The other colonies had not. But really, what we're talking about is the first domino, making it official that they wanted out. They wanted independence. They were going to create their own constitution. And the rest of these other colonies started to fall. The dominoes started to fall pretty quickly. Now, on April 13th, the day after the Halifax Resolves passed, the delegates then formed a committee to start working on a constitution. And here from All Things Liberty, they put it this way. The renowned Halifax Resolves firmly announced that in addition to directing its delegates to vote for independence, North Carolina was, quote, resolving to this colony the sole and exclusive right of forming a constitution and the laws for this colony. It's hard to be more independent than saying, well, we are totally disregarding you guys. We're authorizing our people to vote for independence if we can get some unanimous support from the other colonies, or if we can get support from the other colonies. But in the meantime, we are going to create our own constitution, our own government. We don't care. They may say they still have power, but we're creating our own. And so they started working on that almost immediately, and it was ratified by the 5th Provincial Congress in December of 1776.
For centuries, the mystics of spirit had existed by running a protection racket.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
By making life on Earth unbearable, then charging you for consolation and relief. We, the men of the mind, were the unnamed victims of their creed. We who were willing to break their moral code and to bear damnation for the sin of reason. We who thought and acted while they wished and prayed. While they basked in moral glory for the virtue of surpassing material greed and of distributing in selfless charity the material goods produced by blank out. Now, we are chained and commanded to produce by savages who do not grant us even the identification of sinners, by savages who proclaim that we do not exist.
That is nothing but a bunch of tea-bagging rednecks.
Then threaten to deprive us of the life we don't possess if we fail to provide them with the goods we don't produce. Now we are expected to continue running railroads, and to know the minute when a train will arrive after crossing the span of a continent. We're expected to continue running steel mills, and to know the molecular structure of every drop of metal in the cables of your bridges and in the body of the airplanes that support you in midair. While the tribes of your grotesque little mystics of muscle fight over the carcass of our world, gibbering in sounds of non-language, that there are no principles, no absolutes, no knowledge, no mind. Dropping below the level of a savage who believes that the magic words he utters have the power to alter reality. They believe that reality can be altered by the power of the words they do not utter.
What guarantees are you going to give this liberal about how that will reduce the cost of gasoline at the pump if we let you drill where you say you want to drill.
I can guarantee to the American people, because of the inaction of the United States Congress ever increasing prices unless the demand comes down, and the $5 will look like a very low price in the years to come if we are prohibited from finding new reserves, new opportunities to increase supplies.
And guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing.
And their magic tool is the blankout. The pretense that nothing can come into existence past the voodoo of their refusal to identify.
Would be about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies.
They proclaim that every man born is entitled to exist without labor, and the laws of reality, to the contrary, notwithstanding, is entitled to receive his minimum sustenance, his food, his clothes, his shelter, with no effort on his part, as his due, to receive it from whom? Blankout. Every man, they announce, owns an equal share of the technological benefits created in the world. Created by whom? Blankout. Blankout. Intellectual hoodlums who pose as professors shrug away the thinkers of the past by declaring that their social theories were based on the impractical assumption that man was a rational being. But since men are not rational, they declare, there ought to be established a system that will make it possible for them to exist while being irrational, which means while defying reality. Who will make it possible? Blankout. Any stray mediocrity rushes into print with plans to control the production of mankind.
Approved by Congress.
And whoever agrees or disagrees with his statistics, no one questions his right to enforce his plans by means of a gun. Enforce.
Is this a good idea?
On whom?
Yes, it is.
On whom? On whom? Blankout. The links you strive to drown are causal connections. The enemy you seek to defeat is the law of causality. The law of causality is the law of identity applied to action. All actions are caused by entities. A thing cannot act in contradiction to its nature. The law of identity does not permit you to have your cake and eat it too. The law of causality does not permit you to eat your cake before you have it. But if you drown both laws in the blanks of your mind, if you pretend to yourself and to others that you don't see, then you can try to proclaim your right to eat your cake today and mine tomorrow. You can preach that the way to have a cake is to eat it first before you bake it, that the way to produce it is to start by consuming, that all wishers have an equal claim to all things, since nothing is caused by anything. The corollary of the causeless in matter is the unearned in spirit. Whenever you rebel against causality, your motive is the fraudulent desire not to escape it, but worse, to reverse it. You want unearned love, as if love, the effect, could give you personal value, the cause. You want unearned admiration, as if admiration, the effect, could give you virtue, the cause. You want unearned wealth, as if wealth, the effect, could give you ability, the cause. You plead for mercy. Mercy, not justice, as if an unearned forgiveness could wipe out the cause of your plea. And to indulge your ugly little shams, you support the doctrines of your teachers while they run hog wild, proclaiming that spending, the effect, creates riches, the cause, that machinery, the effect, creates intelligence, the cause, that your sexual desires, the effect, create your philosophical values, the cause. Who pays for the orgy? Who causes the causeless? Who are the victims condemned to remain unacknowledged and to perish in silence, lest their agony disturb your pretense that they do not exist? We are. We, the men of the mind. We are the cause of all the values that you covet. We who perform the process of thinking, which is the process of defining identity and discovering causal connections. We taught you to know, to speak, to produce, to desire, to love. You who abandon reason. Were it not for us who preserve it, you would not be able to fulfill or even to conceive your wishes. You would not be able to desire the clothes that had not been made, the automobile that had not been invented, the money that had not been devised as exchange for goods that did not exist, the admiration that had not been experienced for men who had achieved nothing, the love that belongs and pertains only to those who preserve their capacity to think, to choose, to value.
What is your money really worth? Look to Germany in the 1920s. Paper currency had lost so much value that people were literally burning it in furnaces to stay warm. What people in Washington are thinking right now, no one knows.
Did you wonder what is wrong with the world? You are now seeing the climax of the creed of the uncaused and unearned.
And I don't give a damn about a greenback, a dollar. Spend it fast as I can. for a wailing song and a good guitar. The only things that I understand, oh boy, the only things that I understand. The only things that I understand, oh boy, the only things that I understand.
Everything burns.